The A.B.C. Murders by Agatha Christie. Foreword by Captain Hastings, O.B.E. In this narrative of mine, I have departed from my usual practice of relating only those incidents and scenes at which I myself was present. Certain chapters, therefore, are described in the third person. If I have taken a certain poetic license in describing the thoughts and feelings of various persons, it's because I believe I have set them down with a reasonable amount of accuracy. I may add that they have been vetted by my friend Hercule Poirot. If I have described at too great length some of the secondary personal relationships, it is because the human and personal elements can never be ignored. Hercule Poirot once taught me in a very dramatic manner that romance can be a byproduct of crime. As to the solving of the A.B.C. mystery, I can only say that in my opinion, Poirot showed real genius in the way he tackled a problem entirely unlike any which had previously come his way. It was in June of 1935 that I came home from my ranch in South America for a stay of about 6 months. One of my first actions on reaching England was to look up my old friend Hercule Poirot. I found him installed in one of the newest type of service flats in London. He was looking wonderfully well, hardly a day older than when I had last seen him. "You're looking in fine fettle, Poirot," I said. "In fact, if it were possible, I should say that you had fewer grey hairs than when I saw you last." Poirot beamed at me. "And why is that not possible? It is quite true." "Oh, do you mean your hair is turning from grey to black instead of from black to grey?" "Precisely," said Poirot. "But that's very extraordinary. It seems against nature. As usual, Hastings, you have the beautiful and unsuspicious mind. You perceive a fact and mention the solution of it in the same breath without noticing that you are doing so." I stared at him, puzzled. Without a word, he walked into the bedroom and returned with a bottle in his hand which he handed to me. I took it, for the moment uncomprehending. "Poirot," I cried, "you've dyed your hair." "Exactly." "Dear me," I said, recovering from the shock. "I suppose next time I come home I shall find you wearing false moustaches. Or are you doing so now?" Poirot winced. He was inordinately proud of his moustaches. My words had touched him on the raw. "No, no, indeed, mon ami. That day, I pray the good God, is still far off." He tugged at them vigorously, to assure me of their genuine character. I asked if he still practiced his profession on occasion. Poirot did not answer my question directly. Instead he said, "As soon as I heard you were coming over, I said to myself, something uncommonly recherché will arise. As in former days, we will hunt together, we two. It is your destiny to prevent me from committing the unforgivable error." "Or what do you call the unforgivable error?" "Overlooking the obvious." "Well," I said, smiling, "has this supercrime turned up yet?" "Pas encore. At least, that is—" He paused. His hands automatically straightened an object or two I had inadvertently pushed awry. "I am not sure," he said slowly. There was something so odd about his tone that I looked at him in surprise. Suddenly, with a brief, decisive nod of the head, he crossed the room to a desk near the window. Its contents, I need hardly say, were all neatly docketed and pigeonholed. He came slowly across to me, an open letter in his hand. "Tell me, mon ami," he said, "what do you make of this?" I took it from him with some interest. It was written on thickish white notepaper, in printed characters. "Mr. Hercule Poirot, you fancy yourself, don't you, at solving mysteries that are too difficult for our poor thick-headed British police. Let us see, Mr. Clever Poirot, just how clever you can be. Perhaps you'll find this nut too hard to crack. Look out for Andover on the 21st of the month. Yours, etc., A.B.C. I glanced at the envelope. That was also printed. "Postmarked W.C.1, said Poirot. "Well, what is your opinion?" I shrugged my shoulders as I handed it back to him. "Some madman or other, I suppose?" "That is all you have to say?" His tone was grave. I looked at him curiously. "You take this very seriously, Poirot." A madman, mon ami, is a very dangerous thing. Well, yes, of course, that's true, but what I meant was, it sounds more like a rather idiotic kind of hoax. Poirot shook his head doubtfully, but he did not speak. What have you done about it? I inquired. What can one do? I showed it to Japp. He was of the same opinion as you, a stupid hoax. They get these things every day at Scotland Yard. But you take this one seriously. Poirot replied slowly, There is something about that letter, Hastings, that I do not like. In spite of myself, his tone impressed me. Is there only your own instinct? I said. Not instinct, Hastings. Instinct is a bad word. It is my knowledge, my experience, that tells me that something about that letter is wrong. He gesticulated as words failed him, then shook his head again. Well, the 21st is Friday, I said. If a whacking great robbery takes place near Andover, then— now a robbery. That would be a relief, since it would dispossess my mind of the fear of something else. Of what? I asked. Murder, said Hercule Poirot.
Mr. Alexander Bonaparte Cust rose from his seat and peered near-sightedly round the shabby bedroom. His back was stiff from sitting in a cramped position, and as he stretched himself to his full height, an onlooker would have realized that he was, in reality, quite a tall man. His stoop and his near-sighted peering gave a delusive impression. Going to a well-worn overcoat hanging on the back of the door, he took from the pocket a packet of cheap cigarettes and some matches. He lit a cigarette and then returned to the table at which he had been sitting. He picked up a railway guide and consulted it. Then he returned to the consideration of a typewritten list of names. With a pen, he made a tick against one of the first names on the list. It was Thursday, June the 20th. I had been impressed at the time by Poirot's forebodings about the anonymous letter, but I must admit that the matter had passed from my mind when the 21st actually arrived, and the first reminder of it came with a visit paid to my friend by Chief Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard. The CID inspector had been known to us for many years, and he gave me a hearty welcome. "Well, I never!" he exclaimed. "If it isn't Captain Hastings, back from the wilds of the what-do-you-call-it. You're looking well. Just a little bit thin on top, eh?" I winced slightly. Perhaps my manner showed my feelings, for Japp changed the subject. "Have you heard about Monsieur Poirot's anonymous letter?" he asked. "I showed it to Hastings the other day," said my friend. "Of course," I exclaimed. "It had quite slipped my memory. Let me see, what was the date mentioned?" "The 21st," said Japp. "That's what I dropped in about. Yesterday was the 21st, and just out of curiosity I rang up Andover last night. It was a hoax, all right. Nothing doing. So, just for once, our Belgian friend was barking up the wrong tree." He smiled affectionately at Poirot. "Well, I must be off. Got a little business in the next street to see to. I thought I'd just drop in and put your mind at rest. Pity to let those little grey cells function unnecessarily." With which words and a hearty laugh, Japp departed. "I'm sorry that anonymous letter business came to nothing," I said. "I have indeed been in the wrong over that. About that letter there was, I thought, the odour of the fish. Instead, a mere stupidity. Alas, I grow old and suspicious. If I'm going to cooperate with you, we must look about for some other super-crime," I said with a laugh. We spent an agreeable hour ordering the perfect crime, as one orders a dinner menu, interrupted only when the telephone rang. Poirot rose to answer it. "Allô?" he said. "Allô? Yes, it is Hercule Poirot speaking." He listened for a minute or two, and then I saw his face change. His own side of the conversation was short and disjointed. He replaced the receiver and came across the room to me. "That was Japp speaking, Hastings. He has just got back to the Yard. There was a message from Andover." "Andover?" I cried excitedly. Poirot said slowly, "An old woman of the name of Asher, who keeps a little tobacco and newspaper shop, has been found murdered." I think I felt ever so slightly damped. The murder of an old woman who kept a little tobacco shop seemed somehow sordid and uninteresting. Poirot continued in the same slow, grave voice. "The Andover police believe they can put their hands on the man who did it." I felt a second throb of disappointment. It seems the woman was on bad terms with her husband. He drinks, and he's threatened to take her life more than once. Nevertheless, continued Poirot, in view of what has happened, the police there would like to have another look at the anonymous letter I received. I have said you and I will go down to Andover at once. My spirits revived a little. After all, sordid as this crime seemed to be, it was a crime. I hardly listened to the next words Poirot said, but they were to come back to me with significance later. "This is the beginning," said Hercule Poirot. We were received at Andover police station by Inspector Glenn, a tall, fair-haired man with a pleasant smile. For the sake of conciseness, I think I had better give a brief resume of the bare facts of the case. The crime was discovered by Police Constable Dover at 1 a.m. on the morning of the 22nd. When on his round he tried the door of the shop and found it unfastened, he entered and at first thought the place empty. Directing his torch over the counter, however, he caught sight of the huddled-up body of the old woman. When the police surgeon arrived on the spot, it was elicited that the woman had been struck down by a heavy blow on the back of the head, probably while she was reaching down a packet of cigarettes from the shelf behind the counter. Death must have occurred about 9 to 7 hours previously. "But we've been able to get it down a bit nearer than that," explained the inspector. "We found a man who went in and bought some tobacco at 5:30, and a second man went in and found the shop empty, as he thought, at 6:05. That puts the time at between 5:30 and 6:05. So far, I haven't been able to find anyone who saw Asher in the neighbourhood, but of course it's early as yet. He was in the 3 Crowns at 9 o'clock, pretty far gone in drink. When we get hold of him, he'll be detained on suspicion." "Not a very desirable character, Inspector?" asked Poirot. "Unpleasant bit of goods." "He did not live with his wife?" "No, they separated some years ago. Asher's a German. He was a waiter at one time, but he took to drink and gradually became unemployable. His wife went into service for a bit. Her last place was as cook-housekeeper to an old lady, Miss Rose. When Miss Rose died, she left Mrs. Asher a small legacy, and the woman started this tobacco and newsagent business, quite a tiny place. She just about managed to keep going. Asher used to come round and abuse her now and again, cursing and swearing that he'd bash her head in, and she used to give him a bit to get rid of him." "Nothing was taken from the shop?" "Nothing. Money in the till was undisturbed," said the inspector. "Had they any children?" asked Poirot. "No, there's a niece. She's in service near Overton. Very superior. Steady young woman." Poirot said gravely, "It is your opinion, Inspector, that this man Asher came into the shop drunk, started abusing his wife, and finally struck her down?" The inspector coughed cautiously. "It's a bit early to say that, Mr. Poirot, although it seems the most likely solution. But I must confess, sir, I'd like to have another look at that very odd letter you received." Poirot handed over the letter, and the inspector read it with a frown. "It doesn't read like Asher," he said. "I doubt if Asher would use the term 'our British police.' The man's a wreck. All to pieces. His hand's too shaky to print letters clearly like this. It's good quality notepaper and ink, too. It's odd the letter should mention the 21st of the month. Of course, it might be a coincidence." He was silent a minute or two, a frown creasing his forehead. A.B.C. Who the devil could A.B.C. be? "We'll see if Mary Drower, that's the niece, can give us any help." A constable came in. "Yes, Briggs, what is it?" "It's the man Asher, sir. We brought him in." "Right, bring him in here. Where was he?" "Hiding in a truck on the railway siding, sir," said the constable. Franz Asher was indeed a miserable and unprepossessing specimen. He was blubbering and cringing and blustering alternately. His bleary eyes moved shiftily from one face to another. "Oh, what do you want with me? I have not done nothing. Everyone is so hard on poor old Franz." He started to weep. "That'll do, Asher," said the inspector. "Pull yourself together. I'm not charging you with anything. Yet. On the other hand, if you're not concerned with the murder of your wife—" Asher interrupted him, his voice rising to a scream. "I did not kill her. It is all lies! You are goddamn English pigs, all against me!" "Do you care to say where you were yesterday evening, Asher?" asked the inspector. Yes, I tell you everything. I did not go near Alice. I am with friends at the Seven Stars, and then we had a Red Dog." He hurried on. "De Quillos, he was with me, and old Curdy, and Platt, and lots of the boys. Ach, God, it is the truth I am telling you." His voice rose to a scream again. The inspector nodded to his underling. "Take him away. Detained on suspicion." As the shaking old man with the malevolent mouthing jaw was removed, the inspector said, "If it wasn't for the letter, I'd say he did it." "What about the men he mentions?" asked Poirot. Bad crowd. Not one of them would stick at perjury." Poirot shook his head thoughtfully. "You are sure nothing was taken from the shop?" The inspector shrugged his shoulders. "Packet or two of cigarettes, but you'd hardly commit murder for that." Then Poirot asked, "And there was nothing introduced, how shall I put it, into the shop?" "There was a railway guide," said the inspector. "A railway guide?" "Yes, the kind any big stationers would keep. It was open and turned face downward on the counter. Looked as though someone had been looking up the train from Andover." A light came into Poirot's eyes. He leant forward. "A railway guide, you say? A Bradshaw or an A.B.C.? "By the Lord," said the inspector, "it was an A.B.C. I think that I can date my interest in the case from that first mention of the A.B.C. Railway Guide, so familiarly known by its abbreviation, listing as it did all railway stations in their alphabetical order. It sent a quiver of excitement through me. Surely this could not be a second coincidence. The sordid murder of an old woman in a back street shop took on a new aspect. Who was the mysterious individual who had killed Mrs. Asher and left an A.B.C. railway guide behind? Our next move was a brief interview with the police surgeon. "Never knew who or what struck her," said Dr. Kerr. He spoke briskly and with decision. "The weapon wasn't found. Impossible to say what it may have been." "Would much force be needed to strike such a blow?" asked Poirot. The doctor shot him a keen glance. "Meaning, I suppose, could a shaky old man of 70 do it? Oh, yes, perfectly possible." "Then the murderer could just as well be a woman as a man," said Poirot. The suggestion took the doctor somewhat aback. "A woman, eh? Well, I confess it never occurred to me, but of course it's perfectly possible. Only, psychologically speaking, I shouldn't say this was a woman's crime." Poirot nodded his head in eager agreement. "But one must take all possibilities into account," he went on. "And the body was lying how?" The doctor gave us a careful description of the position of the victim. It was his opinion that she had been standing with her back to the counter, and therefore to her assailant, when the blow had been struck. When we had thanked Dr. Kerr and taken our leave, Poirot said, "You perceive, Hastings, that we have already one further point in favour of Asher's innocence. If he had been abusing his wife and threatening her, she would have been facing him over the counter. Instead, she had her back to her assailant, obviously reaching down tobacco or cigarettes for a customer." I gave a little shiver. Poirot shook his head gravely. "Pauvre femme," he murmured. Then he glanced at his watch. "Overton is not, I think, many miles from here. Shall we run over and have an interview with the niece of the dead woman?" The address which the inspector had given us was that of a good-sized house about a mile on the London side of the village. Our ring at the bell was answered by a pretty, dark-haired girl whose eyes were red with weeping. Poirot said gently, "Ah, I think it is you who are Miss Mary Drower, the parlour-maid here." "Yes, sir, I'm Mary." "Then perhaps I can talk to you for a few minutes if your mistress will not object. It is about your aunt, Mrs. Asher." The girl nodded, tears coming into her eyes. "Well, the mistress is out, sir. She wouldn't mind, I'm sure." She opened the door of a small morning-room. "You were fond of your aunt, Mary?" said Poirot gravely. "Indeed I was, sir. Very good she's been to me always, auntie. I went to her when I was 11 years old after Mother died. A lot of trouble auntie went through with that German fellow. My old devil, she used to call him. Sponging, cadging old beast." The girl spoke with vehemence. "He threatened her, did he not?" said Poirot. "Oh, yes, sir. It was awful, the things he used to say, that he'd cut her throat and the like, and yet Auntie says he was a fine, handsome figure of a man when she married him." "I suppose, Mary," said Poirot, "that having actually heard these threats, you were not so very surprised when you learnt what had happened." "Oh, but I was, sir. You see, I thought it was just nasty talk and nothing more. And it isn't as if Auntie was afraid of him. Why, I've seen him shrink away like a dog with its tail between its legs when she turned on him. He was afraid of her." Poirot paused for a minute or two. Then he said, "Suppose that, after all, he did not kill her." "Didn't kill her?" Mary stared. "That is what I said. Supposing someone else killed her." She stared with even more amazement. "It doesn't seem likely, though, does it? You never heard your aunt mention anyone who had a grudge against her?" "No, indeed, sir." "Did she ever get anonymous letters?" "What kind of letters did you say, sir?" "Letters that weren't signed, or only signed by something like A.B.C. Poirot watched her narrowly, but plainly she was at a loss. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. He got up. "If I want you at any time, Mary, I will write to you here. As a matter of fact, sir, I'm giving in my notice." Again, the tears rose in her eyes. "There's no reason now I should stay, so I'll go to London. I wish that when you go you would give me your address. Here is my card." The girl looked at it with a puzzled frown. "Then you're not anything to do with the police, sir?" "I am a private detective." She stood there looking at Poirot for some moments in silence. "Is there anything odd going on, sir?" "Yes, there is something odd going on. Later you may be able to help me." "I'll do anything, sir. It wasn't right, sir, Auntie being killed." A strange way of putting it, but deeply moving. We drove back to Andover, and as we turned into the street in which the tragedy had occurred, Poirot glanced at his watch. I realized why he had delayed his visit to the scene of the crime until now. It was just on 5:30. He had wished to reproduce yesterday's atmosphere as closely as possible. But if that had been his purpose, it was defeated. Ordinarily, there would have been people passing up and down, with a good sprinkling of children playing on the pavements and in the road. What we saw was a mass of average human beings looking with intense interest at the spot where another human being had been done to death. In front of a small, dingy-looking shop, with its shutters now closed, stood a harassed-looking young policeman, who was stolidly adjuring the crowd to pass along there. From where we stood, the legend painted over the door could be read plainly enough: A. Asher. "Come, let us go inside, Hastings." I was only too ready. We made our way through the crowd. The young police constable unlocked the door to let us pass within. Inside, it was very dark, owing to the shutters being closed. The constable switched on the electric light. The bulb was a low-powered one, so the interior was still dimly lit. I looked about me. A dingy little place. A few cheap magazines, yesterday's newspapers, tobacco and packets of cigarettes, a couple of jars of peppermint humbugs and barley sugars. A commonplace little shop, one of many thousand such others. The constable was explaining, "Down in a heap behind the counter. That's where she was." Poirot's eyes swept round the small space, observing, noting. "And the railway guide was where?" "Here, sir." The constable pointed out the spot on the counter. "It was open at the right page for Andover, and lying face down." "Fingerprints?" I suggested. The man shook his head. There weren't none. Poirot asked if the dead woman lived over the shop. "Yes, sir. You go through that door at the back, sir." Poirot passed through, and I followed him. Behind the shop was a microscopic sort of parlour and kitchen combined. It was neat and clean, but very dreary-looking and scantily furnished. On the mantelpiece were a few photographs. One was a cheap portrait of the girl we had been with that afternoon, Mary Drower. The second was a more expensive type of picture, an artistically blurred reproduction of an elderly woman with white hair. I guessed this was probably the Miss Rose who had left Mrs. Asher the small legacy. The third photograph was a very old one, now faded and yellow. It represented a young man and woman in somewhat old-fashioned clothes, standing arm in arm, with an air of bygone festivity. From the parlour, a stair led to two upstairs rooms. One was empty and unfurnished, the other had evidently been the dead woman's bedroom. A couple of old worn blankets on the bed, a little stock of well-darned underwear in a drawer, cookery recipes in another, a paperback novel entitled The Green Oasis, a pair of new stockings, pathetic in their cheap shininess, a couple of china ornaments, a black raincoat and a woolly jumper hanging on pegs. Such were the worldly possessions of the late Alice Asher. "Pauvre femme," murmured Poirot. "Come, Hastings, there is nothing for us here." When we were once more in the street, he hesitated for a moment or two, then crossed the road. Almost exactly opposite Mrs. Asher's was a greengrocer's shop. In a low voice, Poirot gave me certain instructions. Then he entered the shop. After waiting a minute or two, I followed him in. Poirot was negotiating for a lettuce whilst talking animatedly to the stout lady who was serving him. "It was just opposite you, was it not, that this murder occurred? Possibly you even observed the murderer enter the shop, a tall, fair man with a beard?" "Well, the evening's our busy time. I can't say as I saw anyone of that description anywhere about," she said. I broke in on cue. "Excuse me, sir," I said to Poirot. "I think you've been misinformed. A short, dark man, I was told." An interested discussion intervened, in which the stout lady, her lank husband, and a hoarse-voiced shop-boy all participated. No less than 4 dark men had been observed, and the hoarse boy had seen a tall, fair one. "And what was the point of all that, Poirot?" I demanded, as we left the establishment. "I wanted to estimate the chances of a stranger being noticed entering the shop opposite," he said. "Well, couldn't you simply have asked?" "No, mon ami. If I had simply asked, as you put it, those people would have shut up like oysters. But by making a statement, and by your contradiction of it, tongues are immediately loosened. We also know that that particular time was a busy time. Our murderer chose his time well, Hastings." Poirot paused on the pavement. On the left of Mrs. Asher's was a house with somewhat grimy muslin curtains. To this house Poirot betook himself, and executed a series of sharp flourishes with the knocker. The door was opened, after some delay, by a very dirty child, with a nose that needed attention. "Good evening," said Poirot. "Is your mother within?" This took some 12 seconds to sink in. Then the child turned and bawled up the stairs, "Mum, you're wanted!" A sharp-faced woman looked over the banisters and began to descend. "No good wasting your time," she said, but Poirot interrupted her. He took off his hat and bowed magnificently. "Good evening, madame. I am on the staff of the Evening Flicker. I want to persuade you to accept a fee of £5, and let us have an article on your late neighbour, Mrs. Asher." The irate words arrested on her lips. The woman came down the stairs, smoothing her hair and hitching at her skirt. "Oh, I'm sorry I spoke so sharp just now, but you'd hardly believe the worry one has to put up with fellows coming along selling this, that, and the other. Vacuum cleaners, stockings, lavender bags, and such like foolery. It's Mrs. Fowler this, that, and the other." Seizing adroitly on the name, Poirot said, "Well, Mrs. Fowler, I hope you're going to do what I ask." The £5 hung alluringly before Mrs. Fowler's eyes. "I knew Mrs. Asher, of course, but as to writing anything—" Hastily, Poirot reassured her. He would elicit the facts from her, and the interview would be written up. Thus encouraged, Mrs. Fowler plunged willingly into reminiscence, conjecture, and hearsay. "Well, not what you'd call really friendly, but there she'd had a lot of trouble, poor soul. Everyone knew that, and by rights Franz Asher ought to have been locked up years ago. Not that Mrs. Asher was afraid of him." Poirot asked, "Had Mrs. Asher ever received any peculiar letters? Letters without a proper signature, just something like A.B.C.? Regretfully, Mrs. Fowler returned a negative answer. "Nobody saw this man Asher go into the shop, I believe," said Poirot. Mrs. Fowler sniffed scornfully. "Well, naturally. He wasn't going to show himself," she said. How Mr. Asher had got there without showing himself, she did not deign to explain. She agreed that there was no back way into the house, and that Asher was quite well known in the district. Poirot kept the conversational ball rolling some little time longer, but when it seemed certain that Mrs. Fowler had told him all that she knew, he terminated the interview, first paying out the promised sum. "Rather a dear £5 worth, Poirot," I ventured to remark when we were once more in the street. "My friend, Mrs. Fowler has told us all that she thinks she knows. In the future, however, her evidence may be useful. It is for the future that I have invested that sum of £5. I did not quite understand the point, but at this moment we ran into Inspector Glenn, who was looking rather glum. He had, I gathered, spent the afternoon trying to get a complete list of persons who had been noticed entering the tobacco shop. "And nobody has seen anyone?" Poirot inquired. "Oh, yes. Tall men with furtive expressions, short men with black moustaches, 3 fat men, 2 with beards. I wonder somebody didn't see a gang of masked men with revolvers." Poirot smiled sympathetically. "Does anybody claim to have seen the man Asher?" he asked. "No, they don't. And that's another point in his favour. I've just told the Chief Constable that I think this is a job for Scotland Yard. I don't believe that it's a local crime." Poirot nodded gravely. "I agree with you." Turning to me, he said, "With great haste, my friend, we might just catch the 7:02 back to London." "Well?" I demanded eagerly as the train drew out of Andover. "The crime," said Poirot, "was committed by a man of medium height, with red hair, and a cast in the left eye. He limps slightly on the right foot, and has a mole just below the shoulder-blade." For the moment I was completely taken in. Then the twinkle in my friend's eye undeceived me. "Poirot," I said in reproach, "mon ami, what will you? You fix upon me a look of dog-like devotion and demand of me a pronouncement à la Sherlock Holmes." "If only he had left some clue," I murmured. "But, my friend, you have the railway guide, the A.B.C., that is a clue for you." "Do you think he left it by mistake, then?" "Of course not, he left it on purpose. The fingerprints tell us that." "But there weren't any." "Well, that is what I mean. An innocent man would have left prints. A guilty man would not." "You think we may learn something that way?" "Frankly, Hastings, I am not particularly hopeful. This man, this unknown X, obviously prides himself on his abilities." "So that really, you think the A.B.C. isn't helpful at all?" Poirot did not answer at once. Then he said slowly, "Not in the sense you mean, but in another it is. We are confronted here by an unknown personage. In one sense we know nothing about him. In another sense we know already a good deal. A man who prints clearly and well, who buys good quality paper, who is at great needs to express his personality. I see him as a child, possibly ignored and passed over. I see him growing up with an inward sense of inferiority, warring with a sense of injustice. I see that inner urge to assert himself, to focus attention on himself becoming ever stronger, and events, circumstances crushing it down, heaping perhaps more humiliations on him, and inwardly the match is set to the powder train." "Well, that's all pure conjecture," I objected. "It doesn't give you any practical help. But at least," said Poirot, "we can ask ourselves some practical questions. Why the A.B.C.? Why Mrs. Asher? Why Andover? Personally, Hastings, I believe that the murderer came from outside Andover, and although I say he all the time, we must not exclude the possibility of a woman being concerned." "Oh, surely not," I exclaimed. "Anonymous letters are written by women rather than men," said Poirot. "We must bear that in mind." In the days that followed, I found Poirot curiously disinclined to discuss the case. When I tried to reopen the subject, he waved it aside with an impatient hand. In my own mind, I was afraid that I fathomed his motive. Over the murder of Mrs. Asher, Poirot had sustained a defeat. A.B.C. had challenged him, and A.B.C. had won. My friend, accustomed to an unbroken line of successes, was sensitive to failure, and could not even endure discussion of the subject. Understanding, I respected his weakness, and I made no further reference to the case. I read in the paper the account of the inquest. It was very brief, and the crime attracted very little attention in the press. It had no popular or spectacular features. truth to tell, the affair was fading from my mind also, when on July the 25th it was suddenly revived. I had not seen Poirot for a couple of days, as I had been away in Yorkshire for the weekend. I arrived back on Monday afternoon, and the letter came by the 6 o'clock post. I remember the sudden sharp intake of breath that Poirot gave as he slit open that particular envelope. "It has come," he said. I stared at him, not understanding. "The second chapter of the A.B.C. business, Hastings." "Read," said Poirot, and passed me over the letter. "Dear Mr. Poirot, well, what about it? First game to me, I think. The Andover business went with a swing, didn't it? But the fun's only just beginning. Let me draw your attention to Bexhill-on-Sea, date the 25th inst. What a merry time we are having. Yours, etc., A.B.C. "Good God, Poirot!" I cried. "Does this mean that this fiend is going to attempt another crime?" "Naturally, Hastings. What else did you expect? Do you not remember my saying, 'This is the beginning'?" The following morning saw us at a conference of powers. The Chief Constable of Sussex, the Assistant Commissioner of the C.I.D., Inspector Glenn from Andover, Superintendent Carter of the Sussex Police, Japp, and a younger inspector called Crome, and Dr. Thompson, the famous psychologist, were all assembled together to discuss the matter fully. "Oh, there's no doubt," said the Assistant Commissioner, "that the two letters are in the same hand, and we can fairly assume that that person was responsible for the Andover murder." "Quite," said the Sussex Chief Constable. "We've now got definite warning of a second crime scheduled to take place the day after tomorrow." He looked at his superintendent. "What steps can be taken?" "Well, it's difficult, sir. Speaking fair and square, what steps can we take?" "A suggestion," murmured Poirot. Their faces turned to him. "I think it possible that the surname of the intended victim will begin with the letter B." "An alphabetical complex," said Dr. Thompson thoughtfully. "It's possible," he went on. "On the other hand, it may be that the name Asher was a coincidence. We're dealing, remember, with a madman. So far he hasn't given us any clue as to motive." "Has a madman any motive, sir?" asked the superintendent sceptically. "Well, of course he has. A deadly logic is one of the special characteristics of acute mania. We can at least take certain precautions, Carter, and make a special note of the bees, especially small shopkeepers. Naturally, keep tabs on all strangers as far as possible." The superintendent uttered a groan. "With the schools breaking up and holidays beginning, people are fairly flooding into Bexhill this week." "We must do what we can," said the Chief Constable sharply. "Poirot," I said quietly as the conference broke up, "surely this one can be prevented." He turned a haggard face to me. "Madness, Hastings, is a terrible thing. I am afraid. I am very much afraid." I still remember my awakening on the morning of the 25th of July. It must have been about 7:30. Poirot was standing by my bedside, shaking me by the shoulder. One glance at his face brought me from semi-consciousness into the full possession of my faculties. "What is it?" I demanded, sitting up rapidly. "It has happened." "What?" I cried. "Oh, you mean... But today is the 25th." "It took place last night, or rather in the early hours of this morning." As I sprang from bed and made a rapid toilet, he recounted briefly what he had just learnt over the telephone. "The body of a young girl has been found on the beach at Bexhill. She has been identified as Elizabeth Barnard, a waitress in one of the cafes, who lived with her parents in a little recently built bungalow. Medical evidence gave the time of death as between 11:30 and 1 a.m. "Well, they're quite sure that this is the crime?" I asked, as I hastily lathered my face. "Oh, yes," said Poirot. An A.B.C, open at the trains to Bexhill, was found actually under the body. 20 minutes later, we were in a fast police car crossing the Thames on our way out of London. With us was Inspector Crome, who had been present at the conference the other day and who was officially in charge of the case. Crome was a very different type of officer from Japp, A much younger man, he had lately gained kudos over a series of child murders, having patiently tracked down the criminal, who was now in Broadmoor. He was obviously a suitable person to undertake the present case, but I thought that he was just a little too aware of the fact himself. His manner to Poirot was a shade patronising. "If there's anything you want to ask me about the case, pray do so," he said. "You have not, I presume, a description of the dead girl?" Poirot asked. "She was 23, engaged as a waitress at the Ginger Cat Café." "Pas ça," said Poirot. "I wondered if she were pretty." "As to that, I've no information," said Inspector Crome. His manner said, "Really, these foreigners." A look of faint amusement came into Poirot's eyes. "It does not seem to you important that, yet, pour une femme it is of the first importance. It often decides her destiny." Silence fell. It was not until we were nearing Sevenoaks that Poirot opened the conversation again. "Were you informed by any chance how and with what the girl was strangled?" Inspector Crome replied briefly. "Strangled with her own belt. A thick, knitted affair, I gather?" Poirot's eyes opened very wide. "Aha!" he said. "At last we have a piece of information that tells one something, does it not?" "Well, I haven't seen it yet," said Inspector Crome coldly. At Bexhill we were greeted by Superintendent Carter of the Sussex Police. He had with him a pleasant-faced, intelligent-looking young inspector called Kelsey. The latter was detailed to work with Crome. "We've broken the news to her mother and father," said the superintendent to Crome. "I left them to recover a bit before questioning them." "There are other members of the family, yes?" asked Poirot. "There's a sister, a typist in London, and there's a young man. In fact, the girl was supposed to be out with him last night, I gather." "Any help from the A.B.C. guide?" "It's there." The superintendent nodded towards the table. "No fingerprints. Open at the page for Bexhill." "Well, sir, I'd better get down to business," said Crome. "There's the cafe and there's the girl's home. I'd better go to both. Kelsey can come with me." "And Mr. Poirot?" "I will accompany you," said Poirot to Crome with a little bow. Crome, I thought, looked slightly annoyed. "What about this belt she was strangled with?" asked Crome. "Mr. Poirot is inclined to think it's a valuable clue. I expect he'd like to see it." "Pas du tout," said Poirot quickly. "You misunderstood me." "Well," said Crome, "we'd better be getting along." Our first visit was to the Ginger Cat. Situated on the seafront, this was the usual type of small tea-room. It had little tables covered with orange-checked cloths, and basket-work chairs of exceeding discomfort. It was the kind of place that specialized in morning coffee, teas, and a few sparing lunch dishes for females, such as scrambled eggs and shrimps and macaroni au gratin. The morning coffees were just getting under way. The manageress, Miss Merian, ushered us into a very untidy back sanctum. "This is most distressing," she bleated out in a high, distressed gentlewoman voice. "How it will affect our business, I really cannot think." Miss Merian was a very thin woman of 40, with wispy orange hair. Indeed, she was astonishingly like a ginger cat herself. She played nervously with various fichus and frills that were part of her official costume. "What can you tell me about the dead girl, Miss Merian?" inquired Crome. "Nothing. Absolutely nothing," said Miss Merian positively. "How long had she been working here?" "This was her second summer." "She was pretty, yes?" asked Poirot. Miss Merian gave him an "oh, these foreigners" look. "She was a nice, clean-looking girl," she said distantly. "What time did she go off duty?" asked Crome. 8 o'clock. We close at 8. "Did she mention to you how she proposed to spend her evening?" "Certainly not," said Miss Merian emphatically. "We were not on those terms." "No one came in and called for her when she went off duty?" asked the inspector. "No." "How many waitresses do you employ?" 2 regularly. Miss Barnard and Miss Higley, a very nice young lady." "Perhaps we'd better have a word with Miss Higley, if you please." The feline and gingery Miss Merian left the room, and presently a plump girl, slightly out of breath, with dark hair, rosy cheeks, and dark eyes goggling with excitement, bounced in. "Miss Marion sent me," she announced breathlessly. "You are Miss Higley?" asked Crome. "Yes." "And did you know Elizabeth Barnard well?" "Oh, yes, I knew Betty. She had plenty of fun in her and all that, but, well, she didn't joke or laugh a lot. She was quiet, and she wasn't quiet, if you know what I mean." I will say for Inspector Crome that he was exceedingly patient. As a witness, the buxom Miss Higley was persistently maddening. The net result was meagre in the extreme. She had not been on terms of intimacy with the dead girl. Elizabeth Barnard, it could be guessed, had considered herself a cut above Miss Higley. Elizabeth Barnard had had a friend who worked at the estate agent's Curtin Brunskill near the station. He was a clerk there. She didn't know his name, but she knew him by sight. Good-looking, oh, very good-looking. Clearly there was a tinge of jealousy in Miss Higley's heart. In the end it boiled down to this. Elizabeth Barnard had not confided in anyone in the cafe as to her plans for the evening, but in Miss Higley's opinion she had been going to meet her friend. She had on a new white dress. Elizabeth Barnard's parents lived in a minute bungalow. Mr. Barnard, a stout, bewildered-looking man of 55 or so, was standing waiting in the doorway. "Come in, gentlemen," he said. Inspector Kelsey took the initiative. "This is Inspector Crome of Scotland Yard, sir," he said, "and this is Mr. Hercule Poirot, also from London, and, Captain Hastings," said Poirot. "Pleased to meet you, gentlemen," said Mr. Barnard mechanically. By the time we were ensconced in the living-room, Mrs. Barnard had made her appearance. She had evidently been crying bitterly. Mr. Barnard patted her shoulder and drew her down into a chair. "Oh, it is too cruel," cried Mrs. Barnard tearfully. "It's too cruel." "It's very painful, madam, I know," said Inspector Crome, "and we've every sympathy for you, but we want to know all the facts we can so as to get to work as quick as possible." "That's sense, that is," said Mr. Barnard, nodding approval. "Your daughter was 23, I understand. She lived here with you and worked at the Ginger Cat Cafe, is that right?" "That's it." "You have 2 daughters?" "Yes," said Mr. Barnard. "My eldest daughter works in an office in London." "Weren't you alarmed when your daughter didn't come home last night?" asked the inspector. "Or was she in the habit of returning home late?" "Well, you know what girls are nowadays, Inspector," said Barnard. "There is some rumour, I believe, that your daughter was engaged to be married." "Oh, they don't put it as formally as that nowadays," said Mr. Barnard. "Donald Fraser his name is, and I liked him very much," said Mrs. Barnard. "Was he in the habit of meeting your daughter in the evening after work?" "Well, not every evening. Once or twice a week would be nearer." "Do you know if she was going to meet him yesterday?" "Well, she didn't say. Betty never said much about what she was doing or where she was going, but she was a good girl, Betty." Mrs. Barnard started sobbing again. "I'm sure Donald would never. "Why anyone should want to murder her simply beats me," said Mr. Barnard. "It doesn't make sense." "You're very near the truth there, Mr. Barnard," said Crome. "I tell you what I'd like to do. Have a look over Miss Barnard's room." Mr. Barnard rose and led the way. Crome followed him, then Poirot, then Kelsey, and I brought up the rear. I stopped for a minute to retie my shoelace, and as I did so, a taxi drew up outside, and a girl jumped out of it. As she entered the house, she saw me and stopped dead. "Who are you?" she said. "Oh, well, I can guess." My first impression was of the Dutch dolls that my sisters used to play with in my childhood. Her hair was black, and cut in a straight bob and a bang across her forehead. She was not good-looking, but there was a forcefulness about her that made her a person quite impossible to overlook. "You are Miss Barnard?" "I am Megan Barnard. You belong to the police, I suppose?" "Well, not exactly," I began. She interrupted me. "I don't think I've got anything to say to you. My sister was a nice, bright girl with no men friends. Good morning." She gave a short laugh as she spoke and regarded me challengingly. "I'm not a reporter, if that's what you're getting at." "Well, what are you?" She looked around. "Where's Mum and Dad?" Your father is showing the police your sister's bedroom. Your mother's in there. She's very upset." The girl seemed to make a decision. "Come in here," she said, pulling open a door. I followed her into a small, neat kitchen. The next moment, Poirot had slipped quietly into the room and shut the door behind him. "Mademoiselle Barnard?" he said, with a quick bow. "This is Monsieur Hercule Poirot," I said. Megan Barnard gave him a quick, appraising glance. "I've heard of you. You're the fashionable private sleuth, aren't you?" "Not a pretty description, but it suffices," said Poirot. The girl sat down on the edge of the kitchen table. She felt in her bag for a cigarette. "I heard what you said just now to my friend Hastings. A nice, bright girl with no men friends. You said that in mockery of the newspapers. And it is true. There is a great charity always to the dead. Do you know what I should like? To find someone who knew Elizabeth Barnard and who did not know she was dead. Then, perhaps, I should hear what is useful to me, the truth." Megan Barnard looked at him for a few moments in silence whilst she smoked. Then she spoke. Her words made me jump. "Betty," she said, "was an unmitigated little ass." Poirot merely bowed his head gravely. Megan said, still in the same detached tone, "And I told her so. But I was extremely fond of Betty. There wasn't any harm in her. She's not the week-ending kind, but she liked being taken out and dancing and, all that sort of thing." "And she was pretty, yes?" Megan slipped off the table, went to her suitcase, snapped it open, and extracted something which she handed to Poirot. In a leather frame was a head and shoulders of a fair-haired, smiling girl. It was a face that had an obvious and cheap prettiness. Said Poirot. "Miss Barnard, in what way exactly do you consider your sister was behaving foolishly? Do you mean perhaps in relation to Mr. Donald Fraser?" "That's it, exactly. Don's a very quiet sort of person, but naturally he'd resent certain things, and—" She hesitated, then continued, "and I was afraid he might chuck her altogether. He would have made her a good husband." Poirot gazed at her steadily. "So, it is like that. We do not speak the truth any longer." She shrugged her shoulders and turned towards the door. Poirot's voice arrested her. "Wait, mademoiselle. I have something to tell you." Somewhat to my surprise, Poirot plunged into the whole story of the A.B.C. letters, the murder at Andover, and the railway guides found by the bodies. She drew a deep breath. "Oh, Betty! Betty! How ghastly! You see, mademoiselle, you can talk freely, without fear of hurting anyone. This Donald Fraser has perhaps a violent and jealous temper?" Then she said quietly, "I'm trusting you now, Mr. Poirot. I'm going to give you the absolute truth. Don is a bottled-up person, if you know what I mean. But underneath it all he minds things terribly, and he was always jealous of Betty. He was devoted to her, and she was very fond of him, but it wasn't in Betty to be fond of one person and not notice anybody else. And of course, working in the Ginger Cat, she was always running up against men, especially in the summer holidays. She used to say that, as she'd got to settle down with Don one day, she might as well have her fun now while she could." Megan paused, and Poirot said, "I understand. Continue." "It was just that attitude of hers that Don couldn't understand, and once or twice they had flaming big rows about it. It's like all those quiet people. When they lose their tempers, they do so with a vengeance. Don was so violent that Betty was frightened." "When was this?" asked Poirot. "Well, there was one row nearly a year ago, and another, a worse one, just over a month ago. This last flare-up came because she'd told Don she was going to Hastings to see a girl pal, and he'd found out that she'd really been over to Eastbourne with some man. He was married, which made it worse. There was an awful scene. Betty saying she wasn't married to him yet, and Don all white and shaking, saying that one day... "Yes?" "He'd commit murder," said Megan in a lowered voice. Poirot nodded his head gravely several times. "I didn't think he'd actually done it, but I was afraid it might be brought up. Several people knew about the quarrel." Again Poirot nodded his head gravely. "Just so. And I may say, mademoiselle, that but for the egoistical vanity of a killer, that is just what would have happened. If Donald Fraser escapes suspicion, it will be thanks to A.B.C.'s maniacal boasting." He was silent for a minute or two, then he said, "Do you know if your sister met this married man, or any other man, lately?" Megan shook her head. An electric bell trilled sharply above the girl's head. She went to the window and leaned out. "It's Don." "Bring him in here," said Poirot quickly. "I would like to have a word before our good inspector takes him in hand." I felt at once sorry for the young man. His white, haggard face and bewildered eyes showed how great a shock he had had. He was a well-made fellow, not good-looking, but with a pleasant face and flaming red hair. "Megan, for God's sake, tell me, I've only just heard." His voice trailed away. Poirot moved forward. "Did Miss Barnard tell you where she was going last night?" Fraser said mechanically, "She told me she was going with a girlfriend to St. Leonard's." "Did you believe her?" His face then, menacing, convulsed by sudden passion, made me understand that a girl might well be afraid of rousing his anger. Poirot said crisply, "Betty Barnard was killed by a homicidal murderer. Only by speaking the exact truth can you help us to get on his track." "That's right, Don," said Megan. "You've got to come clean." Donald Fraser looked at Poirot. I wasn't sure," he said. "I was suspicious." "What did you do?" asked Poirot. "I went over to St. Leonard's, but there was no sign of her." "And then?" I lost my head, rather. I thought some man had probably taken her in his car to Hastings. I went on there. All damn foolishness. In the end I gave it up and came back." "At what time?" "I don't know. It must have been midnight or after when I got home." The blind, bewildering misery and anger that had possessed him was still apparent. Poirot then retreated to the hall. I joined him. "Did anything strike you, Poirot?" I inquired. "Only the amazing magnanimity of the murderer, Hastings." I had not the courage to say that I had not the least idea what he meant. Conferences. Much of my memories of the A.B.C. case seem to be of conferences. This particular conference was to decide whether or not the facts relative to the anonymous letters should or should not be made public in the press. The Bexhill murder had attracted much more attention than the Andover one. It had, of course, far more elements of popularity. The victim was a young and good-looking girl. Also, it had taken place at a popular seaside resort. The A.B.C. Railway Guide came in for its share of attention. The guide had not figured at all in the meagre accounts of the Andover murder, so there seemed at present little likelihood of the two crimes being connected in the public eye. "We've got to decide upon a policy," said the Assistant Commissioner. "Shall we give the public the facts? What's your opinion, Crome?" "If you make it public, sir, you're playing A.B.C.'s game. He wants to make a splash." The Assistant Commissioner looked across at Dr. Thompson. "Suppose we refuse our lunatic the satisfaction of the publicity he craves. What's he likely to do?" "Commit another crime," said the doctor promptly. "How many crimes do you think this lunatic has in mind?" "Looks like A to Z," said Dr. Thompson cheerfully. "But you'll have him long before that. G or H, let's say?" The Assistant Commissioner struck the table with his fist. "My God! Are you telling me we're going to have 5 more murders?" "It won't be as much as that, sir," said Inspector Crome with confidence. "I'd guarantee to get him by the time he gets to F. I think I've got the psychology of the case fairly clear. Every time A.B.C. brings off a crime, his self-confidence increases. He becomes so overweeningly confident that he also becomes careless." "It is as Inspector Crome says," agreed Poirot. He turned to the inspector. "Are there any material facts in the Bexhill case?" "Well, nothing very definite. A waiter at the Splendide in Eastbourne recognises the dead girl's photograph, as that of a young woman who dined there on the evening of the 24th in company with a middle-aged man in spectacles. He's also been recognised at a roadhouse place called the Scarlet Runner, halfway between Bexhill and London. They say she was there about 9 p.m. on the 24th with a man who looked like a naval officer. Either of them is probable. We haven't been able to trace the A.B.C. Poirot said slowly, "It seems to me that there's one very important clue, the discovery of the motive." "Well, isn't that pretty obvious?" said Crome. "An alphabetical complex. Isn't that what you'd call it?" "Ça oui," said Poirot. "But consider, if the victims are alphabetically selected, then they are not being removed because they are a source of annoyance to the murderer personally. He kills, it would seem, from his letters to amuse himself. Can that really be true? And on what principle does he select his victims, apart from the merely alphabetical? Could he be the magnanimous murderer? Franz Asher and Donald Fraser would have been arrested if not for the warning letters of A.B.C. Is he so soft-hearted that he cannot bear others to suffer for something they did not do? A final suggestion. Is his motive direct personal hatred of me, of Hercule Poirot? Or is his animosity impersonal, directed against a foreigner?" Inspector Crome cleared his throat. "A little unanswerable at present, perhaps?" "Nevertheless, my friend," said Poirot, looking straight at him, "it is there, in those questions, that the solution lies." "We've come to no decision about the publicity business," said the Assistant Commissioner. "If I may make a suggestion, sir," said Crome, "why not wait until the receipt of the next letter? Make it public then. It'll put A.B.C. on his mettle. He'll be determined to succeed, and that's when we'll get him." How little we knew what the future held. It was on a Friday that A.B.C.'s third letter came. The evening post arrived about 10 o'clock. There were 4 or 5 letters, I remember. The last one I looked at was addressed in printed characters. "Poirot!" I cried. My voice died away. "It has come? Open it, Hastings, quickly. Every moment may be needed. We must make our plans." I tore open the letter and extracted the printed sheet. "Read it," said Poirot. I read aloud. "Poor Mr. Poirot. Not so good at these little criminal matters as you thought yourself, are you? Rather past your prime, perhaps? Let us see if you can do any better this time. This time it's an easy one. Churston, on the 30th. Do try and do something about it. It's a bit dull having it all my own way, you know. Good hunting. Ever yours, A.B.C. "Hastings!" Poirot's voice came sharply and interrupted me. "When was that letter written? Is there a date on it?" I glanced at the letter in my hand. "Written on the 27th, I announced. "Bon Dieu, Hastings! Do you not realize? Today is the 30th! "But why? How?" I stammered. Poirot caught up the torn envelope from the floor. The address ran, Monsieur Hercule Poirot, White Horse Mansions. Across the corner was scrawled, "Not known at White Horse Mansions EC1, nor at White Horse Court. Try White Haven Mansions." "Mon Dieu!" murmured Poirot. "Does even chance aid this madman? Vite, vite! We must telephone to Scotland Yard." A minute or two later, we were speaking to Crome. For once, the self-controlled inspector did not reply, "Oh, yes." Instead, a stifled curse came to his lips. He heard what we had to say, then rang off to make a call to Churston as rapidly as possible. Poirot glanced at the clock. 20 minutes past 10. An hour and 40 minutes to go. Is it likely that A.B.C. will have held his hand so long? I opened the railway guide. "There's a midnight train. It gets to Churston at 7:15. "We will take that, Hastings," said Poirot. When we arrived at the platform, the first person we saw was Inspector Crome. "Of all the damned luck," said Crome as Poirot handed him the letter. "You don't think," I suggested, "that it was done on purpose?" "No," said Crome. "I wonder now. I'd almost bet the Japp drinks White Horse whisky." "Ah, c'est ingénieux, ça," said Poirot, driven to admiration in spite of himself. "He prints the letter, and the bottle is in front of him." "That's the way of it," said Crome. "He started off White, then wrote Horse instead of Haven." The inspector was also travelling down by train, and just as it was pulling out of the station, we saw a man running along the platform. He reached the inspector's window and called up something. Poirot and I hurried along the corridor and tapped on the door of the inspector's sleeper. "You have news, yes?" asked Poirot. Crome said quietly, "It's about as bad as it can be. Sir Carmichael Clarke has been found with his head bashed in." Sir Carmichael Clarke had been in his time a very well-known throat specialist. Retiring from his profession very comfortably off, and then inheriting a considerable fortune, he had been able to indulge his passion for Chinese pottery and porcelain. He was now the possessor of one of the best-known collections of Chinese art. He was married but had no children, and lived in a house he had built for himself near the Devon coast. It did not require much reflection to realize that his death, following that of the young and pretty Betty Barnard, would provide the best newspaper sensation for years. "Eh bien," said Poirot, "it is possible that publicity may do what private efforts have failed to do. The whole country will now be looking for A.B.C. "Unfortunately," I said, "that's what he wants." Poirot sighed and shook his head. "These crimes must not go on. Soon, I must see the truth." We arrived at Coomside, Sir Carmichael Clarke's house, at about 8 o'clock. A local police officer had met us at the station and put us au courant of the situation. Sir Carmichael Clarke had been in the habit of taking a stroll after dinner every evening. When the police rang up at some time after 11, after the instruction from Scotland Yard to warn all persons in the area whose name began with C to be on the lookout, it was ascertained that he had not returned. Since his stroll usually followed the same course, it was not long before a search party discovered his body. Death was due to a crashing blow with some heavy instrument on the back of the head. An open A.B.C. had been placed face downwards on the body. On arrival at the house, an elderly butler ushered us into a long dining-room where a big fair-haired man with a sunburnt face was waiting. This was Franklin Clarke, the dead man's brother. He had the resolute, competent manner of a man accustomed to meeting with emergencies. Inspector Wells made the introductions. "This is Inspector Crome of the C.I.D., Mr. Hercule Poirot, and Captain Hayter." "Hastings," I corrected coldly. Franklin Clarke shook hands with each of us in turn. "We can discuss the position over breakfast," he said. We were soon doing justice to excellent eggs and bacon and coffee. "Am I really to believe," said Franklin Clarke, looking at Inspector Crome, "that my poor brother is the victim of a homicidal maniac, and that this is the third murder, and that in each case an A.B.C. railway guide has been deposited by the body?" "That is substantially the position, Mr. Clarke." "But why?" "In my experience, Mr. Clarke, the motives are usually grossly inadequate," said Inspector Crome. "There is a desire to assert one's personality, to make a splash, in fact, to be a somebody instead of a nonentity. Is that true, Mr. Poirot?" Clarke seemed incredulous. "Absolutely true," replied my friend. "Will you let me have a few facts, please, Mr. Clarke?" said Crome. "Your brother was not upset and worried in any way yesterday?" "To be upset and worried was my poor brother's normal condition. You may not know that my sister-in-law, Lady Clarke, is suffering from an incurable cancer and cannot live much longer. I myself returned from the East not long ago, and I was shocked at the change in my brother." Crome nodded. "Now, I believe, Mr. Clarke, that it was your brother's habit to go for a stroll every evening." "Quite right." "And everyone in the house knew of this habit?" "Well, of course." "I suppose no stranger came up to the house and asked to see Sir Carmichael yesterday?" "Neither I nor any of the staff saw anyone," answered Clarke. Poirot interpolated a question. "Supposing your brother had been found shot at the foot of the cliff, what would have been your first thought?" "Quite frankly, suicide," said Clarke. "Encore," said Poirot. "A fact that repeats itself." Before Clarke could ask what this meant, a young woman entered the room. He rose. "This is Miss Grey, gentlemen, my brother's secretary." My attention was caught at once by the girl's extraordinary Scandinavian fairness. She looked about 27, and seemed to be as efficient as she was decorative. She sat down. "Miss Grey, did you deal with Sir Carmichael's correspondence?" asked Crome. "Yes, all of it." I suppose he never received a letter or letters signed A.B.C.? She shook her head. No, I'm sure he didn't. And you have noticed no strangers hanging about? Not exactly hanging about. Of course, there are a lot of people what you might call wandering about at this time of year. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Inspector Crome asked to be taken over the ground of Sir Carmichael's nightly walk. Franklin Clark led the way, and Miss Grey accompanied us. She and I were a little behind the others. "All this must have been a terrible shock to you all," I said. "It seems quite unbelievable," replied Miss Grey. "It must have been a terrible shock to his wife," I said. "Lady Clark is kept under morphia a good deal. I think she is in too dazed a condition to appreciate what goes on around her." Suddenly we came out on a grassy ridge overlooking the sea, and a beach of glistening white stones surrounded by dark green trees. "How beautiful!" I exclaimed. Clark turned to me eagerly. "Isn't it?" Then he said in a more matter-of-fact tone, "This was my brother's evening walk." We proceeded to a spot near the hedge, halfway across the field where the body had been found. Crome nodded. "Easy enough. The man stood here in the shadow. Your brother would have noticed nothing till the blow fell." The girl at my elbow gave a quick shiver. Franklin Clark said, "Hold up, Thora. It's pretty beastly, but it's no use shirking facts." We went back to the house where the body had been taken after being photographed. As we mounted the wide staircase, the doctor came out of a room, black bag in hand. "Anything to tell us, Doctor?" asked Clark. "Perfectly simple case. He didn't suffer. Death must have been instantaneous." Thora Grey was standing at the head of the stairs. There was an odd, scared expression on her face. "What are you thinking, Miss Grey?" I asked. "I'm wondering where he is now. The murderer, I mean." "The police are searching," I began. My commonplace words broke the spell. Thora Grey pulled herself together. "Yes," she said, "of course." She descended the staircase. I stood turning her words over in my mind. A.B.C. Where was he now? Mr. Alexander Bonaparte Cust came out with the rest of the audience from the Torquay Palladium, where he had been watching that highly emotional film, Not a Sparrow. He blinked a little as he came out into the afternoon sunshine. Newspaper boys passed along crying out, "Latest! Homicidal maniac at Churston!" Mr. Cust bought a paper. There were big headlines. Sir Carmichael Clark murdered. Terrible tragedy at Churston. A young man passing by remarked, "Nasty business, eh?" Mr. Cust jumped. "Oh, very, very." His hands, the young man noticed, were trembling so that he could hardly hold the paper. "You never know with lunatics," said the young man chattily. "Sometimes it's the war that unhinges them." Mr. Cust laughed. He laughed for some time. The young man was slightly alarmed. "He's a bit batty himself," he thought. Aloud he said, "I'm sorry, sir. I expect you were in the war." "I was," said Mr. Cust. It unsettled me. My head's never been quite right since. Sometimes I hardly know what I'm doing." "Oh, I'm sorry," said the young man awkwardly, as he removed himself hurriedly. Mr. Cust read and reread the paper. People passed in front of him talking about the murder. Girls passed him, girls in white and pink and blue. Not once did their eyes linger for a second on Mr. Cust. He continued walking sedately into town. With the murder of Sir Carmichael Clark, the A.B.C. mystery leapt into the fullest prominence. It was the belief of Scotland Yard that the fullest publicity was the best chance of laying the murderer by the heels, and the newspapers were full of nothing else. Crome and his colleagues were indefatigable in following up the smallest clues, but Poirot seemed to me strangely supine. We argued now and again. "But what is it that you would have me do, my friend? My force, Hastings, is in my brain, not in my feet. All the time, whilst I seem to you idle, I am reflecting." "But what can you possibly gain by reflection?" I asked. "You know the facts of the 3 cases by heart." "It is not the facts I reflect upon, but the mind of the murderer. And all the time I learn more. After the next crime, Poirot! My friend looked at me dispassionately. "But yes, Hastings. I think it is almost certain there will be another. After another crime, we shall know infinitely more. Crime is terribly revealing." "Who it is?" "No, Hastings. I shall not know his name and address. I shall know what kind of man he is." I shook my head without replying. "All the same," said Poirot, after a minute or two, "I have a project that will please you, since it is active and not passive." I did not quite like his tone. "What is it?" I asked cautiously. "The extraction from the friends, relations, and servants of the victims of all they know." "Do you suspect them of keeping things back?" "Not intentionally," said Poirot, "but at the time of a murder, people select what they think is important. Quite frequently, they think wrong." "And how is one to get at the right thing?" "Simply by conversation," he said. It seemed to me extremely vague and hazy. "You do not see it? Your wits are not so sharp as those of a mere servant girl." He tossed me over a letter. "Dear Sir," I read, "I have been thinking a lot since these awful 2 murders like poor Auntie's. I made so bold as to write to the sister of the young lady killed at Bexhill and tell her I was coming to London to get a place, and asked if I could come to her or her mother, as I said 2 heads might be better than 1 to find out who this awful fiend is. The young lady wrote very nicely and said she'd been thinking something of the same kind as I had. So I am writing, sir, to say I am coming to London, and this is my address. Hoping I am not troubling you, yours respectfully, Mary Drower." "Mary Drower," said Poirot, "is a very intelligent girl." He picked up another letter. "Read this," he said to me. It was a line from Franklin Clark, saying that he was coming to London and would call upon Poirot the following day, if not inconvenient. "Action, mon ami," said Poirot, "is about to begin." Franklin Clark arrived at 3 o'clock on the following afternoon, and came straight to the point. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, "I'm not satisfied." "No, Mr. Clark?" "No. I've no doubt that Crome is a very efficient officer, but frankly, he puts my back up. That air of his of knowing best. Monsieur Poirot, we oughtn't to let the grass grow under our feet." "Just what Hastings is always saying." "But go right ahead. We've got to get ready for the next crime." "So you think there will be a next crime?" said Poirot. "Certainly." "Tell me your idea exactly, Mr. Clark." "I propose, Monsieur Poirot, a kind of special legion, to work under your orders, composed of the friends and relatives of the murdered people. Miss Megan Barnard, Mr. Donald Fraser, the niece of the Andover woman, and, Miss Grey." "Oh, Miss Grey." Nobody in the world could put a gentle nuance of irony into a couple of words better than Poirot. About 35 years fell away from Franklin Clark. He looked suddenly like a shy schoolboy. "Yes. You see, Miss Grey was with my brother for over 2 years. She knows the local people and everything, and I've been away for a year and a half." Poirot took pity on him and turned the conversation. "You have been in the East, in China?" "Yes, I have a kind of roving commission to purchase things for my brother." "Very interesting," said Poirot. "And I approve highly of your idea." A few days later, the Special Legion met at Poirot's rooms. Unable, of course, to resist the occasion, he made a little speech. "Mesdames et messieurs, here we have 3 murders. An old woman, a young girl, an elderly man. Only one thing links these 3 people together, the fact that the same person killed them. That means that the same person was present in 3 different localities, and was seen necessarily by a large number of people. That he is a madman goes without saying. This person has succeeded so far in covering his traces completely. The police have certain vague indications, but nothing upon which they can act. Nevertheless, there must exist indications which are not vague, but certain. There were facts of which the murderer had informed himself beforehand. The best hour for committing the crime at Andover, the mise en scène at Bexhill, the habits of Sir Carmichael Clark at Churston. It is like the jigsaw puzzle. Each of you may have a piece apparently without meaning, but which, when reunited, may show a definite portion of the picture as a whole. I make the assumption that someone knows something that they do not know they know. "Suppose," suggested Poirot, "that you all go over your own remembrances of the time preceding the murder. Perhaps you'll start, Mr. Clark." "Well, let's see. On the morning of the day Carr was killed, I went off sailing. Lunch at home, slept in a hammock, tea, wrote some letters, missed the post, drove into Paynton to post them, then dinner, and, well, I'm not ashamed to say it, reread a book of E. Nesbit's that I used to love as a kid. Then the telephone rang, and no further. Now, reflect, Mr. Clark. Did you meet anyone on your way down to the sea in the morning?" "Well, lots of people." "Can you remember anything about them?" "Well, let's see, I remember a remarkably fat woman, 2 young men with a fox terrier, a girl with yellow hair, squeaking as she bathed." "You are a good subject." Poirot turned to Thora Grey. "Miss Grey, I did correspondence with Sir Carmichael in the morning, saw the housekeeper, wrote letters and did needlework in the afternoon, I fancy. It was quite an ordinary day. I went to bed early." Rather to my surprise, Poirot asked no further questions. He turned to Megan Barnard. "Miss Barnard, can you remember the last time you saw your sister?" She nodded. "It would be about a fortnight before her death. We went to Hastings to the swimming pool. What did you talk about most of the time?" The girl frowned in an effort of memory. "She talked about being hard up, and a little about Don. She said she also disliked Millie Higley. That's the girl at the cafe." Poirot turned to the red-haired young man. "Mr. Fraser, you went to the cafe on the fatal evening. Can you remember anyone at all whom you noticed whilst you were waiting there?" "I don't remember anybody," said the young man. Poirot sighed and turned to Mary Drower. "I suppose you got letters from your aunt?" "Oh, yes, sir." "When was the last?" Mary thought a minute. 2 days before the murder, sir. She said she expected me over on the Wednesday. That's my day out, sir. And she said we'd go to the pictures. It was going to be my birthday, sir." Something, the thought of the little festivity perhaps, suddenly brought the tears to Mary's eyes. "It was just the thought of her and me, looking forward to our treat." She gulped down a sob. "I know just what you feel like," said Franklin Clark. "It's always the little things that get one." Megan said with a sudden eager warmth, "That's true, awfully true. The same thing happened after Betty died. Mum had bought some stockings for her as a present, the very day it happened. Poor Mum, she was all broken up. I found her crying over them. She kept saying, 'I bought them for Betty,' and she never even saw them." Her own voice quivered a little. She leaned forward, looking straight at Franklin Clark. There was between them a sudden sympathy. Donald Fraser stirred uneasily. Thora Grey diverted the conversation. "Aren't we going to make any plans for the future?" she asked. "Of course," said Franklin Clark. "I don't know whether there are any points Monsieur Poirot thinks might repay investigation. I'll take them down." "I consider it just possible," said Poirot, "that the waitress Millie Higley might know something useful." "A. Millie Higley," wrote Franklin Clark. "I suggest 2 methods of approach. You, Miss Barnard, might say your sister never liked her, and she will tell you just what she thought of your sister. And the second method? May I suggest, Mr. Fraser, that you should show signs of interest in the girl?" "Well, is that necessary?" "No, Mr. Fraser. It is just a possible line of exploration." "Shall I try my hand?" asked Franklin. "I've a pretty wide experience, Monsieur Poirot." "You've got your own part of the world to attend to," said Thora Grey rather sharply. Franklin's face fell just a little. "Yes," he said, "I have." "All the same," said Poirot, "I do not think there is much you can do down there. Mademoiselle Grey, now, she is far more fitted." Thora Grey interrupted him. "But you see, Monsieur Poirot, I have left Devon for good." "Ah?" inquired Poirot. "Miss Grey very kindly stayed on to help me clear up things," said Franklin, "but naturally she prefers a post in London." Poirot directed a sharp glance from one to the other. "How is Lady Clark?" he demanded. I was admiring the faint colour in Thora Gray's cheeks and almost missed Clark's reply. Pretty bad, but before I left she expressed a desire to see you, Monsieur Poirot." "Certainly, Mr. Clark. Shall we say the day after tomorrow?" "Good. I'll let Nurse know, and she'll arrange the dope accordingly." Poirot turned to Mary. "I think you might perhaps do good work in Andover. Try the children. They do not chat readily to outsiders, but you are known in the street where your aunt lived." "Monsieur Poirot," said Thora Gray, "what was the postmark on the third letter?" "Putney, SW15, mademoiselle." "Well, that points to A.B.C. being a Londoner." "On the face of it, yes." "Monsieur Poirot," said Clark, "how would it be if I inserted an advertisement? A.B.C. urgent. H.P. close on your track. 100 for my silence. XYZ. Well, nothing quite so crude, but you see the idea." "I think it's very dangerous and silly," said Thora Gray sharply. "It can do no harm." Poirot smiled a little, "although I think that A.B.C. will be too cunning to reply." Franklin Clark, looking a little abashed, consulted his notebook. A. Miss Barnard and Millie Higley. B. Mr. Fraser and Miss Higley. C. Children in Andover. D. Advertisement. Poirot sat humming a little tune to himself. "Murder, I have often noticed, Hastings, is a great matchmaker." "Really, Poirot?" I cried, scandalized. Poirot continued, "Did you observe how Franklin Clark was suddenly in sympathy with Mademoiselle Megan, how he looked at her, and did you also notice how very much annoyed Mademoiselle Thora Gray was about it? And Mr. Donald Fraser—" I was about to argue the point, but at that moment the door opened, and Thora Gray entered. "Forgive me for coming back," she said composedly, "but there was something I would like to tell you, Monsieur Poirot." "Certainly, mademoiselle." "It is just this, Monsieur Poirot. Mr. Clark very generously gave you to understand just now that I had left Coomside by my own wish. But as a matter of fact, it is not quite like that. I was quite prepared to stay on. It was Lady Clark who wished me to leave. I can make allowances. The drugs they give her make her suspicious and fanciful." I could not but admire the girl's courage. "I call it splendid of you to come and tell us this," I said. "It is rather a blow to me," said Thora ruefully. "I had no idea Lady Clark disliked me so much. But," she said with a little smile, "I don't want to shelter behind Mr. Clark's chivalry." There was a warm glow in her words. "That is all I came to say. Goodbye." After she had left, Poirot said with a sudden change of subject, "Do you know, Hastings, I cannot rid my mind of the impression that already, in our conversation this afternoon, something was said that was significant. Just an impression that reminds me of something I have already heard or seen or noted." "Something at Churston?" "No, before that. No matter. It will come to me." There was an air of deep and settled melancholy over Coomside when we saw it again for the second time. This may, perhaps, have been partly due to the autumn weather, and partly, no doubt, it was the semi-shut-up state of the house. A capable-looking hospital nurse came to greet us. "Monsieur Poirot," she said briskly, "I am Nurse Capstick. I got Mr. Clark's letter saying you were coming." She led us upstairs to a room on the first floor. Lady Clark was sitting in a big armchair near the window. She was painfully thin, and her face had the grey, haggard look of one who suffers much pain. She had a slightly far-away, dreamy look, and I noticed that the pupils of her eyes were mere pinpoints. "This is Monsieur Poirot, whom you wanted to see," said Nurse Capstick. "Oh, yes, Monsieur Poirot," said Lady Clark vaguely, extending her hand. "My friend Captain Hastings, Lady Clark. How do you do? So good of you both to come." There was a silence. Lady Clark seemed to have lapsed into a dream. Presently, with a slight effort, she roused herself. She shook her head with febrile impatience. "I cannot even remember what it was I wanted to say to you." "Was it something about your husband's death?" said Poirot. "Carr's death, yes, perhaps. Mad, poor creature. The murderer, I mean. You haven't caught him yet?" she asked. "He must have been hanging around here that day." "And no strangers came to the house that day," said Poirot. "Who says so?" demanded Lady Clark with a sudden vigour. Poirot looked slightly taken aback. "The servants," he said. "Miss Grey." Lady Clark said very distinctly, "That girl is a liar." Lady Clark was going on, speaking now rather feverishly. "I never liked her. Carr thought all the world of her. I dare say she did her work well. I soon sent her packing. Franklin had the impertinence to suggest that she might be a comfort to me. Franklin's a fool. I didn't want him getting mixed up with her. He's a boy. No sense." Poirot said, "Why did you say that Miss Grey was a liar?" "Because she is. She told you no strangers came to the house, didn't she?" "Yes." "Well, I saw her with my own eyes out of this window, talking to a perfectly strange man on the front doorstep on the morning of the day Carr died." "What did this man look like?" asked Poirot. "Not a tradesman, a shabby sort of person. I can't remember." A sudden quiver of pain shot across her face. "Please, you must go now. I'm a little tired." "That's an extraordinary story," I said to Poirot, as we journeyed back to London, "about Miss Grey and a strange man." "You see, Hastings, it is as I tell you. There is always something to be found out." "Why did Miss Grey lie about it, and say she'd seen no one?" "The easiest way to answer the question," said Poirot, "is to ask her." "It is monstrous to suppose that a girl like that could be in league with a madman," I said indignantly. "Ah, Hastings, you are always the true knight, ready to come to the rescue of damsels in distress. Good-looking damsels, bien entendu." "How ridiculous you are, Poirot," I said, unable to keep myself from laughing. "Ah, well, one cannot be tragic all the time," he replied. On our arrival at Whitehaven Mansions, we were told that a gentleman was waiting to see Poirot. I expected it to be Franklin, or perhaps Japp, but to my astonishment it turned out to be none other than Donald Fraser. He seemed very embarrassed, and his inarticulateness was more noticeable than ever. Poirot suggested sandwiches and a glass of wine. Fraser looked at him with a strange air of grateful obedience. "You have come to me," said Poirot, "because there is something that you must tell to someone. I am the proper person. Speak." Fraser hesitated, his hands twisting nervously. "Monsieur Poirot, I've been dreaming, but it isn't an ordinary dream, and I'm going mad." As a matter of fact, he looked mad. "It's always the same. I'm on the beach, looking for Betty. She's lost. I've got to find her. I'm carrying her belt in my hand, and then the dream changes. I'm not looking any more. She's there in front of me, sitting on the bench. She doesn't see me coming. It's... Oh, I can't." "Go on." Poirot's voice was authoritative, firm. "I come up behind her. She doesn't hear me. I slip the belt around her neck and pull. Oh, pull!" I gripped the arms of the chair. The thing was too real. "She's choking. She's dead. I've strangled her. And then her head falls back and I see her face, and it's Megan, not Betty." He leant back, white and shaking. "What's the meaning of it, Mr. Poirot? I didn't kill her, did I?" What Poirot answered I do not know, for at that minute I heard the postman's knock. What I took out of the letterbox banished all my interest in Donald Fraser's extraordinary revelations. "Poirot," I cried, "it's come! The fourth letter!" He sprang up and seized it from me. The three of us read it together. "Still no success. Fie, fie! What are you and the police doing? Well, well, isn't this fun? And where shall we go next for honey? Poor Mr. Poirot, I'm quite sorry for you. If at first you don't succeed, try again. We've a long way to go still. Tipperary? No, that comes farther on. Letter T. The next little incident will take place at Doncaster on September the 11th. So long. A.B.C. With those printed words jeering from the white stiff paper, the hunt was up once more. Inspector Crome had come round from the yard, and while he was still there, Franklin Clark and Megan Barnard came in. The girl explained that she, too, had come up from Bexhill. "I wanted to ask Mr. Clark something," she said. She seemed rather anxious to excuse and explain her presence. I just noted the fact, without attaching much importance to it. Crome was not, I think, any too pleased to see the various participants in the drama. "I may tell you, Inspector," said Clark, "that we formed an association of our own to deal with the matter." Inspector Crome became extremely official and non-committal. He said in his best manner, "Oh, yes." "I rather fancy old A.B.C. has done you again, Inspector," Clark went on. Crome, I noticed, could often be goaded into speech when other methods failed. "I don't fancy the public will have much to criticise in our arrangements this time," he said. "The Fool has given us ample warning. The 11th isn't until Wednesday of next week. The whole of Doncaster, police and civilians, will be out to catch one man." Clark said quietly, "It's easier to see you're not a sporting man, Inspector." Crome stared at him. "What do you mean, Mr. Clark? Man alive, don't you realise that next Wednesday the St. Ledger is being run at Doncaster?" The inspector's jaw dropped. For the life of him, he could not bring out the familiar, "Oh, yes." Instead he said, "That's true, yes. That complicates matters." "It is my belief," said Clark, "that the murder will take place on the racecourse, perhaps actually while the Ledger is being run." For the moment, his sporting instincts took a momentary pleasure in the thought. Inspector Crome rose, and taking the letter with him, went out. A few minutes later, Thora Grey entered. She was wearing a black coat and skirt and furs. A little black hat was perched on the side of her golden head. We settled down to a discussion. It went without saying that we all intended to be present, but the race meeting undoubtedly complicated the plans we had made tentatively beforehand. A feeling of discouragement swept over me. What could this little band of 6 people do, after all, however strong their personal interest in the matter might be? As though in answer to my thoughts, Poirot raised his voice. "Mes enfants," he said, "we must not disperse the strength. We must look within, and not without, for the truth. We must say to ourselves, each one of us, what do I know about the murderer?" "We don't know anything," said Clark, shaking his head. "None of us has ever seen him or spoken to him. We've gone over everything we all know again and again." "Not everything," said Poirot. "Miss Grey here told us that she did not see or speak to any stranger on the day that Sir Carmichael Clark was murdered." Thora Grey nodded. "That's quite right." "Is it? Lady Clark told us, mademoiselle, that from her window she saw you standing on the front doorstep talking to a man." The girl seemed genuinely astonished. She shook her head. "Lady Clark must have made a mistake. I never—" "Oh!" A crimson wave flooded her cheeks. I'd forgotten all about it. It wasn't important. Just one of those men who come round selling stockings. You know, ex-army people. He was quite a harmless sort of person. I suppose that's why I forgot about him." Poirot was swaying to and fro, his hands clasped to his head. He was muttering to himself with such vehemence that nobody else said anything, but stared at him instead. "Stockings," he was murmuring. "Stockings. Stockings, it is the motif, yes. 3 months ago, and the other day, and now I have it." He sat upright and fixed me with an imperious eye. "You remember Hastings? Andover. The shop. We go upstairs, the bedroom, on a chair, a pair of new silk stockings." He turned to Megan. "You spoke of your mother, who wept because she had bought your sister some new stockings on the very day of the murder." He looked round on us all. "You see? It is the same motif, 3 times repeated. That cannot be coincidence. When Mademoiselle spoke, I had the feeling that what she said linked up with something. I know now it was the words spoken by Mrs. Asher's neighbour, Mrs. Fowler, about people who were always trying to sell you things, and she mentioned stockings. Tell me, mademoiselle, it is true, is it not, that your mother bought those stockings from someone who came to the door?" Yes, she did," said Megan Barnard. He wheeled round on Thora. "Describe this man." She looked at him blankly. I can't. I don't know. He had glasses, I think, and a shabby overcoat." "Yes, Miss Grey, and?" "He stooped. I hardly looked at him. He wasn't the sort of man you'd notice." Poirot said gravely, "the whole secret of the murders lies there in your description of the murderer, for without a doubt he was the murderer. He wasn't the sort of man you'd notice." Mr. Alexander Bonaparte Cust sat very still. His breakfast lay cold and untasted on his plate. A newspaper was propped up against the teapot, and it was this newspaper that Mr. Cust was reading with avid interest. Suddenly, he buried his head in his hands with a stifled groan. He did not hear the sound of the door opening. His landlady, Mrs. Marbury, stood in the doorway. I was wondering, Mr. Cust, if you'd fancy a nice, Why, whatever is the matter?" Mr. Cust raised his head from his hands. "Nothing, Mrs. Marbury. I'm not feeling very well this morning." "Is it your head troubling you again, Mr. Cust? You'd best not go away today, then." Mr. Cust sprang up abruptly. No, I have to go. It's business. Very important." His hands were shaking. Seeing him so agitated, Mrs. Marbury tried to soothe him. "Well, if you must, you must. Going far this time?" "No, I'm going to—" He hesitated for a minute or two. "Cheltenham." There was something so peculiar about the tentative way he said the word that Mrs. Marbury looked at him in surprise. Then she stooped to pick up the paper that was lying crumpled on the floor. "Nothing but this murdering business in the papers nowadays," she said, as she glanced at the headlines. "Doncaster. That's the place he's going to do his next murder." Mr. Cust's lips moved, but no sound came from them. "Why, Mr. Cust, you do look bad. Really now, you oughtn't to go travelling today." Mr. Cust drew himself up. "It isn't necessary, Mrs. Marbury. I have always been punctual in my engagements." His manner was so firm that Mrs. Marbury gathered up the breakfast things and reluctantly left the room. Mr. Cust dragged a suitcase from under the bed and began to pack. Then, unlocking a cupboard, he transferred a dozen or so flattish cardboard boxes, about 10 inches by 7, from a shelf to the suitcase. He glanced at the railway guide on the table and then left the room, suitcase in hand. Setting it down in the hall, he put on his hat and overcoat. As he did so, he sighed deeply. So deeply that the girl who came out from a room at the side looked at him in concern. "Anything the matter, Mr. Cust?" Mr. Cust said abruptly, "Are you at all subject to premonitions, Miss Lily?" "Well, I don't know that I am, really." Mr. Cust sighed again. "Well, goodbye, Miss Lily. I'm sure you've been very kind to me always here." "Well, don't say goodbye as though you were going away forever," laughed Lily. No, of course not." "See you Friday." The girl laughed again. "Where are you going this time? Seaside again?" "No, Cheltenham." "Well, that's nice too. Not quite as nice as Torquay. By the way, you must have been quite near where the murder was. The A.B.C. murder. It happened while you were down there, didn't it?"
Yes, but Churston's 6 or 7 miles away."
"Why, you may have passed the murder in the street."
"Yes, I may, of course,"
said Mr. Cust, with such a ghastly and contorted smile that Lily Marbury noticed it. "Oh, Mr. Cust, you don't look well."
"I'm quite all right, quite all right. Goodbye, Miss Lily."
He fumbled to raise his hat and hastened out of the door. "Funny old thing," said Lily Marbury. Inspector Crome said to his subordinate, "Get me a list of all stocking manufacturing firms and circulate them. I want a list of all their agents, you know, fellows who sell on commission and tout for orders." "This the A.B.C. case, sir?"
"Yes, one of Mr. Hercule Poirot's ideas."
The inspector's tone was disdainful. "Right, sir. Mr. Poirot's done some good stuff in his time, but I think he's a bit gaga now, sir."
"He's always posing," said Inspector Crome. "Takes in some people. It doesn't take in me. Now then, about the arrangements for Doncaster."
Tom Hartigan said to Lily Marbury,
Saw your old dugout this morning."
"Who? Mr. Cust?"
"Cust it was, at Euston. Looking like a lost hen as usual. I think the fellow's half loony. First he dropped his paper, then he dropped his ticket. I picked that up. He hadn't the faintest idea he'd lost it. Thanked me in an agitated manner, but I don't think he recognised me."
"Oh, well," said Lily.
"He's only seen you passing in the hall." They danced once round the floor.
"You danced something beautiful," said Tom. "Did you say Euston or Paddington?" asked Lily abruptly, as they danced round again.
"Euston," said Tom.
"Funny. I thought you went to Cheltenham from Paddington."
"So you do. But old Cust wasn't going to Cheltenham. He was going to Doncaster."
"Well, he told me he was going to Cheltenham. Oh, Tom, I hope he won't get murdered. It's Doncaster the A.B.C. murder's going to be."
"Cust's all right. His name doesn't begin with a D."
"He might have been murdered last time. He was down near Churston at Torquay when the last murder happened."
"Well, that's a bit of a coincidence, isn't it?" said Tom. He laughed. "He wasn't at Bexhill the time before, was he?"
Lily crinkled her brow. "He was away. I remember because he forgot his bathing suit. Mother was mending it for him."
"Well, he must have been going to the seaside."
Tom's face crinkled up in amusement.
"I say, Lily, what price your old dugout being the murderer himself?"
"Poor Mr. Cust, he wouldn't hurt a fly," laughed Lily. They danced on happily together. In their unconscious minds, something stirred. Doncaster. I shall, I think, remember that 11th of September all my life. We were here, on the spot. Poirot, myself, Clark, Fraser, Megan Barnard, Thora Grey, and Mary Drower, and in the last resort, what could any of us do? Of us all, the only person likely to make a recognition was Thora Grey. Some of her serenity had broken down under the strain. "I never really looked at him. If I did see him again, I mightn't recognize him." Poirot patted her shoulder kindly. "Now then, ma petite, not the hysteria. If you should see this man again, you would recognize him." "How do you know?" "Oh, a great many reasons. For one, because the red succeeds the black." "What do you mean, Poirot?" I cried. "I speak the language of the tables. At roulette there may be a long run on the black, but in the end red must turn up. It is the mathematical law of chance." "You mean that luck turns?" "Exactly, Hastings," said Poirot. "What it comes to is that a murderer's got to take a chance," said Clark. "Precisely. A murderer is always a gambler, and like many gamblers, a murderer often does not know when to stop. His opinion of his cleverness grows, and then, mes amis, the ball spins, and the run of colour is over. It drops into a new number, and the croupier calls out, 'Rouge.'" "You think that will happen in this case?" asked Megan. "It must happen sooner or later. So far the luck has been with the criminal. Sooner or later it must turn and be with us. I believe it has turned. The clue of the stockings is the beginning. Now, instead of everything going right for him, everything will go wrong for him, and he too will begin to make mistakes." Poirot glanced at his watch. We took the hint. It had been agreed that we were to make an all-day session of it, patrolling as many streets as possible in the morning, and later stationing ourselves at various likely points on the racecourse. The girls went off to get their hats. Donald Fraser was standing by the window looking out, apparently lost in thought. Franklin Clark glanced over at him, then lowered his voice a little. "Look here, Monsieur Poirot. You went down to Churston, I know, and saw my sister-in-law. Did she say or hint... did she suggest at all—" He stopped, embarrassed. Poirot's face was all blank innocence. Franklin Clark got rather red. "Perhaps you think this isn't the time for personal things, but I'd like to get things quite straight. An admirable course." Clark ploughed on rather heavily. "My sister-in-law's an awfully nice woman. I've been fond of her always, but with that kind of illness one tends to fancy things." "Ah?" By now there was no mistaking the twinkle in Poirot's eye, but Franklin Clark was past noticing it. "It's about Thora, Miss Grey," he said. "Oh, it is of Miss Grey you speak." Poirot's tone held innocent surprise. "Yes, Lady Clark got certain ideas in her head, you see. Thora, Miss Grey, is, well, rather a good-looking girl." "Perhaps, yes," conceded Poirot. "And, of course, Thora was invaluable to my brother, but it was all perfectly above board. I mean, Thora isn't the sort of girl—" "No?" said Poirot helpfully. "But my sister-in-law got it into her head to be, well, jealous, I suppose. Of course it's partly the illness and the morphia and all that." He paused. "Yes?" "What I want you to understand, Monsieur Poirot, is that there isn't anything in it at all. Look," he fumbled in his pocket, "here's a letter I received from my brother when I was in the Malay States. I'd like you to read it." Poirot took it and read aloud the extracts pointed out by Franklin. "Things go on here much as usual. Charlotte is moderately free from pain. I wish I could say more. You remember Thora Grey. Her sympathy and interest are unfailing. I was indeed lucky to find her. No daughter could be a closer and more sympathetic companion. Her life had been a difficult and not always a happy one, but I am glad to feel that she has a home and true affection." "You see," said Franklin, "that's how my brother felt to her. He thought of her like a daughter. I don't want you to get a false impression of Thora from anything Lady Clark may have said." Poirot returned the letter. "I can assure you," he said, smiling, "that I never permit myself to get false impressions from anything anyone tells me. I form my own judgments." "Well," said Clark, stowing away the letter, "I'm glad. We'd better be off, then." As we left the room, Poirot called me back. "Am I correct in supposing that you intend to be a cavalier to one of the ladies, Hastings?" "Well, that was the idea." "And did you propose to honour Miss Grey with your company?" "Well, that was the idea." "I am sorry to upset your plans, Hastings, but I must request you to escort Mary Drower, and I must request that you do not leave her." "But, Poirot, why?" "Because, my dear friend, her name begins with a D. We must take no chances." I promised to be faithful to my trust. I went out, leaving Poirot sitting on a chair near the window. In front of him was a little roulette wheel. He spun it as I went out of the door, and called after me, "Rouge! That is a good omen, Hastings. The luck, it turns." Below his breath, Mr. Ledbetter uttered a grunt of impatience as his next-door neighbour got up and stumbled clumsily past him, dropping his hat over the seat in front and leaning over to retrieve it. And all this at the culminating moment of Not a Sparrow, that all-star thrilling drama of pathos and beauty. He moved his head irritably from side to side. People! Why on earth people couldn't wait till the end of a film? Ah, that was better. The annoying gentleman had left. The film pursued its course. Mr. Ledbetter breathed a sigh of satisfaction as the lights went up. He never left the cinema quickly. It always took him a moment or two to return to the prosaic reality of everyday life. He glanced around. Not many people this afternoon. Well, naturally, they were all at the races. Everyone was hurrying towards the exit. Mr. Ledbetter prepared to follow suit. The man in the seat in front of him was asleep, slumped down in his chair. An irate gentleman was saying to the sleeping man, whose legs were stretched out blocking the way, "Excuse me, sir." Mr. Ledbetter reached the exit. He looked back. There seemed to be some sort of commotion. Perhaps that man in front of him was dead drunk. He hesitated, and then left the cinema. And in doing so, missed the sensation of the day. The commissionaire was saying, "I believe you're right, sir. He's ill. Why? What's the matter, sir?" The other had drawn away his hand with an exclamation and was examining a sticky red smear. Blood! The commissionaire gave a stifled exclamation. He had caught sight of the corner of something yellow projecting from under the seat. "God blimey," he said. "It's an A.B.C." Mr. Cust came out of the Regal Cinema and looked up at the sky. A beautiful evening. A really beautiful evening. He trotted along the street smiling to himself until he came to the Black Swan where he was staying. He climbed the stairs to his bedroom on the second floor. As he entered, his smile faded suddenly. There was a stain on his sleeve near the cuff. He touched it tentatively. Wet and red. Blood. His hand dipped into his pocket and brought out something, a long, slender knife. The blade of that, too, was sticky and red. Mr. Cust sat there a long time. His tongue passed feverishly over his lips. "It isn't my fault," said Mr. Cust. He sounded as though he were arguing with somebody, a schoolboy pleading with his headmaster. He passed his tongue over his lips again. His eyes crossed the room to the wash-basin. A minute later, he was pouring out water from the old-fashioned jug into the basin. Removing his coat, he rinsed the sleeve carefully, squeezing it out. Ugh! The water was red now. A tap on the door. He stood there frozen into immobility, staring. The door opened. A plump young woman, jug in hand. "Oh, excuse me, sir. Your hot water, sir." He managed to speak then. "Thank you, I've washed in cold." Why had he said that? Immediately her eyes went to the basin. He said frenziedly, "I've cut my hand." There was a pause. Yes, surely a very long pause, before she said, "Yes, sir." She went out, shutting the door. Mr. Cust stood as though turned to stone. He could hear nothing but the beating of his own heart. Then, suddenly, from frozen immobility, he leapt into activity. He slipped on his coat, tiptoed to the door and opened it. He crept down the stairs. He paused. Which way now? He made up his mind, darted quickly along a passage, and out by the door that gave into the yard. A couple of chauffeurs were there tinkering with cars and discussing winners and losers. Mr. Cust hurried across the yard and out into the street, round the corner, then to the left, right again. Dare he risk the station? Yes, there would be crowds there, special trains. If luck were on his side, he would do it all right. If only luck were with him. Inspector Crome was listening to the excited utterances of Mr. Ledbetter. "I assure you, Inspector, my heart misses a beat when I think of it." Inspector Crome, indifferent to the behaviour of Mr. Ledbetter's heart, said, "Just let me have it quite clear. This man went out towards the close of the big picture. He passed you, and in doing so he stumbled. He pretended to stumble. I see it now," replied Mr. Ledbetter. "Then he leaned over the seat in front to pick up his hat. He must have stabbed the poor fellow then. You didn't hear anything? A cry or a groan?" Mr. Ledbetter had heard nothing, but in the vividness of his imagination he invented a groan. Inspector Crome took the groan at its face value. "Can you describe him?" he asked. "Well, he was a big man, 6 foot at least. A giant." "Fair or dark?" I'm not exactly sure. Sinister-looking fellow." "He didn't limp, did he?" asked Inspector Crome. Yes, now I come to think of it, I think he did." "Was he in his seat the last time the lights came up?" No, he came in after the big picture began." Inspector Crome nodded, handed Mr. Ledbetter a statement to sign, and got rid of him. "That's about as bad a witness as you'll find," he remarked. "Let's have the commissionaire back." The commissionaire came in and stood to attention. "Now then, Jameson, let's hear your story." Jameson saluted. "Yes, sir. Close of the performance, sir. I was told there was a gentleman taken ill, sir. Gentleman was slumped down in his seat like. One of the gentlemen standing by put his hand to the ill gentleman's coat and drew my attention. Blood, sir. It was clear the gentleman was dead, stabbed, sir. My attention was drawn to an A.B.C. railway guide, sir, under the seat." "And did you notice a man leaving about 5 minutes earlier?" asked Crome. "Well, there were several, sir. Could you describe them?" "Afraid not, sir." "A pity. That'll do, Jameson." The commissionaire departed. A police constable came in and saluted. "Mr. Hercule Poirot's here, sir, and another gentleman." Inspector Crome frowned. "Oh, well," he said, "better have 'em in, I suppose." Coming in hard on Poirot's heels, I saw that both Inspector Crome and the chief constable were looking worried and depressed. The chief constable greeted us with a nod of the head. "Glad you've come, Monsieur Poirot," he said politely. "Another A.B.C. murder?" inquired Poirot. "Yes, damned audacious bit of work.
Man leaned over and stabbed the fellow in the back. A.B.C. down on the floor between the dead man's feet."
"Has the man been identified?" asked Poirot.
"Yes, A.B.C.'s slipped up for once. Deceased's a man called Earlsfield. George Earlsfield."
"Curious," commented Poirot.
"Let's have the next witness in," said Crome. "Fellow who was sitting in the next seat but one to the dead man."
A middle-aged gentleman was led in. He was highly excited.
"Your name, please?"
said Inspector Crome calmly. "Downes. Roger Emmanuel Downes."
"Mr. Downes, will you tell us in your own words what happened?"
"Well, at the close of the performance, I rose from my seat. The seat beyond me was empty, but in the one beyond, a man was sitting, apparently asleep. I was unable to pass him to get out, as his legs were stuck out in front of him. I asked him to allow me to pass. He did not move and made no response. I then took him by the shoulder to waken him. His body slumped down further, and I became aware that he was either unconscious or seriously ill. I called out, 'Fetch the commissionaire!' As I took my hand from the man's shoulder, I found it was wet and red. I can assure you, gentlemen, the shock was terrific."
The Chief Constable looked at Mr. Downes with a very curious expression. "You can consider that you're a lucky man, Mr. Downes."
"Oh, I do, sir. I have a weak heart, but not even a palpitation."
"You don't quite take my meaning, Mr. Downes. You're about the same height and build as the dead man, and you were wearing a woolen scarf. Somehow or other, when the murderer followed you in, he got confused. He picked the wrong back. That knife was meant for you."
However well Mr. Downes' heart had stood the former tests, it was unable to stand this one. He turned purple in the face. A glass of water was brought to him.
"You mean," he gasped, "but why me?"
Inspector Crome struggled with the temptation to reply, "Why not?" and instead said, "I'm afraid it's no good expecting a lunatic to have reasons for what he does." Mr. Downes stood up.
"I think I'll go home, gentlemen. I don't feel very well." "I'll send a constable with you just to see you're all right," said the Chief Constable.
Mr. Downes went out shakily.
"The house will be watched," said the Chief Constable.
"You think," said Poirot, "that when A.B.C. finds out his mistake he may try again?"
The Chief Constable nodded. "It's a possibility," he said. "Wish we could get a description of the fellow."
"Have patience," said Poirot. "Up to now the murderer has not made a mistake. He is bound to make one soon."
"Well, if that's all you've got to go on," began the Chief Constable with a snort, but he was interrupted.
"Mr. Ball, of the Black Swan Inn, with a young woman, sir. He reckons he's got summat to say might help." Mr. Ball, of the Black Swan, was a large, slow-thinking, heavily moving man. He exhaled a strong odour of beer. With him was a plump young woman, with round eyes, clearly in a state of high excitement.
"Hope I'm not wasting valuable time," said Mr. Ball in a slow, thick voice. "But this wench, Mary here, reckons she's got something to tell as you ought to know." "Well, my girl, what's your name?" said the Chief Constable.
"Mary, sir. Mary Stroud."
Mary turned her round eyes on her master. "It's her business to take hot water to the gents' bedrooms," said Mr. Ball. "Get on, lass, naught to be afraid of."
Mary plunged in a breathless voice into her narrative. "I knocked on the door, and there wasn't no answer, so I went in, and he was there, washing his hands. 'It's your hot water, sir,' I said. And I did knock, but 'Oh,' he says, 'I've washed in cold,' he said, and so, naturally, I looks in basin, and, oh, God help me, sir, it were all red."
"Red?" said the Chief Constable sharply.
"Yes, sir, that's right, sir," she plunged on. "And his face, sir, it looked queer, mortal queer."
"When was this?" asked the Chief Constable.
"About 4:45, sir. Over 3 hours ago."
"Why didn't you come at once?" "Or didn't hear about it at once," said Ball. "Not till news came along as there'd been another murder done, and then the lass she screams out as it might have been blood in the basin. I asks a few questions, and one of the lads in courtyard says he saw a fella sneaking out that way, and by his description it was the right one."
Inspector Crome drew a sheet of paper towards him. "Describe this man, quick as you can." "Medium-sized he were, rather shabby-looking, and he stooped and wore glasses," said Mary. 2 men were dispatched to the Black Swan. Mr. Ball and Mary accompanied them. The sergeant returned about 10 minutes later. "I brought the register, sir," he said. "Here's the signature." We crowded round. The writing was not easy to read. "A.B. Case, or is it Cash?" said the Chief Constable. "A.B.C., said Crome significantly. "Did he have any luggage?" "One good-sized suitcase, sir, packed with small cardboard boxes full of silk stockings." Crome turned to Poirot. "Congratulations," he said. "Your hunch was right." Inspector Crome was in his office at Scotland Yard. The telephone on his desk gave a discreet buzz, and he picked it up. "Jacob speaking, sir. There's a young fellow come in with a story that I think you ought to hear." Inspector Crome sighed. On average, about 20 people a day turned up with so-called important information about the A.B.C. case. "Very well, Jacobs. Send him along." A tall, moderately good-looking young man was ushered in. "This is Mr. Tom Hartigan, sir." The inspector rose and shook hands. "Sit down, won't you, Mr. Hartigan? Now then, fire ahead." Tom began nervously. "Well, it's like this, sir. I've got a young lady, you see, and her mother lets rooms up Camden Town way. Their second floor back has been let for over a year to a man called Cust." "Cust, eh?" said the inspector. "That's right, sir. Sort of middle-aged bloke, and what's rather vague and soft, sort of creature wouldn't hurt a fly. And I'd never have dreamed of anything being wrong if it hadn't been for something rather odd." In a somewhat confused manner, and repeating himself once or twice, Tom described his encounter with Mr. Cust at Euston Station, and the incident of the dropped ticket. "You see, sir, look at it how you will, it's funny like. Lily, that's my young lady, sir, she was quite positive that it was Cheltenham, he said, and her mother says the same. Lily then says it's rather a coincidence, because he was down Churston way at the time of the last crime. Laughing like, I asked her whether he was at Bexhill the time before, and she says she don't know, but he was away at the seaside." Tom took a breath and went on. "And then, after the Doncaster murder, sir, it was in all the papers that information was wanted as to the whereabouts of a certain A.B. case or cash, and it gave a description that fitted enough. I asked Lily what her Mr. Cust's initials were, and her mother said they were A.B. right enough. Then we got down to it and tried to figure out if Cust had been away at the time of the first murder in Andover. We had a job of it, but we got it fixed because Mrs. Marbury had a brother come from Canada to see her on June 21st. He arrived unexpected like, and she wanted to give him a bed, and Lily suggested that as Mr. Cust was away, Bert Smith might have his bed." Inspector Crome listened very attentively. "That's all?" he asked. "Yeah, that's all, sir. I hope you don't think I'm making a lot of nothing." Tom flushed slightly. "Not at all. You were quite right to come here. Of course, it's very slight evidence, but it certainly warrants an interview with your Mr. Cust. Is he at home now?" "Yes, sir." "When did he return?" "The evening of the Doncaster murder, sir." "Thank you. I need hardly tell you to be careful of your manner if you come across this Mr. Cust." He rose and shook hands. "Well, sir?" asked Sergeant Jacobs, re-entering the room. "It's promising," said Inspector Crome. "Sergeant, put on a couple of men to watch this Camden Town address." On leaving Scotland Yard, Tom Hartigan rejoined Lily Marbury, who was waiting for him on the embankment. "Well, what did he say?" asked Lily. Tom gave her a brief resume of the interview. Lily sighed and shook her head. "Poor Mr. Cust. It does seem awful," she observed. "If he's A.B.C., he's committed 4 terrible murders, my girl. If we're right, I expect my name will be in the papers." "Oh, Tom, will it? And in the meantime, what do you say to a bite at the corner house?" "All right. Half a minute," said Lily. "I must just telephone from the station." "Who to?" asked Tom. "A girl I was going to meet." She slipped across the road and rejoined him 3 minutes later, looking rather flushed. "Now then, Tom, tell me about Scotland Yard." Mr. Cust put the receiver back very gently on the hook. He turned to where Mrs. Marbury was standing in the doorway of the room, clearly devoured by curiosity. "Not often you have a telephone call, Mr. Cust? Not bad news, I trust?" No. His eyes caught the legend on the newspaper he was carrying. "Births, marriages, deaths." My sister's just had a little boy," he blurted out. He who never had a sister. "Oh, well, that's nice, I'm sure," said Mrs. Marbury. "I was surprised when the lady asked to speak to Mr. Cust. Just at first, I fancied it was my Lily's voice. Is it the first one, or have you other little nephews and nieces?" "It's the only one,"
said Mr. Cust, "and I think I must go off at once." "Will you be away long, Mr. Cust?" called Mrs. Marbury as he ran up the stairs. "Oh, no, 2 or 3 days, that's all." He disappeared into his bedroom. Mrs. Marbury's conscience gave her a twinge. Last night, Tom and Lily, and all the hunting back over dates, trying to make out that Mr. Cust was that dreadful monster A.B.C. In some obscure way that she could not have explained, Mr. Cust's statement that his sister had had a baby had effectually removed any doubts Mrs. Marbury might have had of her lodger's bona fides. Mr. Cust came quietly back down the stairs, a bag in hand. His eyes rested for a minute on the telephone. That brief conversation re-echoed in his brain. "Is that you, Mr. Cust? I thought you might like to know there's an inspector from Scotland Yard may be coming to see you." What had he said? He couldn't remember. Why had she telephoned to him, disguising her voice from her mother? Could she possibly have guessed? But surely if she knew— He paused by the hall stand with its load of umbrellas and coats. Should he— A slight noise from the kitchen decided him. No, Mrs. Marbury might come out. He opened the front door, passed through and closed it behind him. Conference again. The Assistant Commissioner, Inspector Crome, Poirot, and myself. The A.C. was saying, "A good tip, that of yours, Monsieur Poirot, about checking a large sale of stockings." Poirot spread out his hands. "It was indicated. This man could not be a regular agent. He sold outright, instead of touting for orders." Crome consulted a file. "Shall I run over the position to date, sir?" "Yes, please," said the Assistant Commissioner. "I've checked with Churston, Paynton and Torquay. Got a list of people where he went and offered stockings. I must say he did the thing thoroughly. Bexhill much the same. Offered stockings to about a dozen addresses, including Mrs. Barnard and the Ginger Cat. Left hotel early in the evening, arrived back in London about 11:30 the following morning. As to Andover, same procedure. Offered stockings to Mrs. Fowler, next door to Mrs. Asher, and to half a dozen others in the street. Acting on information received, I went to the address given me by Tom Hartigan, but found that Cust had left the house about half an hour previously. He received a telephone message, his landlady told me. First time such a thing had happened." "An accomplice?" suggested the Assistant Commissioner. "Hardly," said Poirot. "It is odd that— unless—" We all looked at him inquiringly. He shook his head, however, and the inspector proceeded. "I made a thorough search of his room and found a block of notepaper similar to that on which the letters were written, a large quantity of hosiery, and a parcel which turned out to contain 8 new A.B.C. railway guides. Proof positive," said the Assistant Commissioner. "I found something else too," said the inspector, his voice becoming suddenly almost human with triumph. "Behind the hall hat stand. There it was, the knife, the dried blood still on it." "Good work, Crome," said the A.C. "We only need the man himself now. We'll get him, sir, never fear." Poirot started out of a reverie. "There is something that worries me very much. It is the why, the motive." "But, my dear fellow, the man's crazy," said the Assistant Commissioner. "Pulling him in is only a matter of time. I wonder where he is now." Mr. Cust stood by a greengrocer's shop. He stared across the road. Yes, that was it. Mrs. Asher, newsagent and tobacconist. It was difficult, very difficult, now that he hadn't any money left. He looked at a poster outside a newsagent's shop. The A.B.C. murder case. Murderer still at large. Interviews with Monsieur Hercule Poirot. Mr. Cust said to himself, "Hercule Poirot. I wonder if he knows." He thought, "I can't go on much longer." A man was a ridiculous animal. And he, Alexander Bonaparte Cust, was particularly ridiculous. He had always been. Where was he going? He didn't know. He no longer looked anywhere but at his feet. Lights in front of him. And letters. Police station. "Oh, that's funny," said Mr. Cust.
He gave a little giggle. Then he stepped inside. Suddenly, as he did so, he swayed and fell forward. It was a clear November day. Dr. Thompson and Chief Inspector Japp had come round to acquaint Poirot with the result of the police court proceedings in the case of Rex versus Alexander Bonaparte Cust. With a first-class alibi for the Bexhill murder, the whole case might be weakened, said Japp. Poirot turned to Thompson. "What is your opinion, Doctor?" "Of Cust? He's playing the sane man remarkably well. He's an epileptic, of course." "What an amazing denouement that was," I said. "He's falling into the Andover police station in a fit. Yes, A.B.C. has always timed his effects well." "Is it possible to commit a crime and be unaware of it?" I asked. "His denials seem to have a ring of truth to them." "I'm against the theory that Cust committed these crimes without knowing he'd done them. You might put that theory forward if it weren't for the letters. But the letters show premeditation and a careful planning of the crime," said Dr. Thompson. "And on the subject of the letters," said Poirot, "Cust is persistently dumb. Until I get at the reason for those letters being written to me, I shall not feel that the case is solved." Turning to Chief Inspector Japp, Poirot asked, "Does the Bexhill alibi worry you?" "Oh, it does a little. This man Strange is a tough character. He sticks to his story. He swears that he met Mr. Cust at the White Cross Hotel in Eastbourne on the evening of July the 24th. He wanted someone to talk to. Cust made an ideal listener. After dinner, he and Cust played dominoes for hours. They separated at 10 minutes past midnight, and if that's correct, then Cust couldn't be strangling Betty Barnard on the beach at Bexhill between midnight and 1 o'clock. "It is a problem, yes," said Poirot. "Of course, strictly speaking, it oughtn't to matter. We've got Cust on the Doncaster murder. The blood-stained coat, the knife, not a loophole there, but it spoils a pretty case. He did the Doncaster murder. He did the Churston murder. He did the Andover murder. Then, by hell, he must have done the Bexhill murder. But I don't see how." Japp shook his head and got up to leave. "Now's your chance, Monsieur Poirot," he said. "Chrome's in a fog. Exert those cellular arrangements of yours I used to hear so much about. Show us the way he did it." "What about it, Poirot?" I asked. "Are the little grey cells equal to the task?" Poirot answered my question by another. "Tell me, Hastings, do you consider the case ended?" "Well, we've got the man. It's only the trimmings that are needed." Poirot shook his head. "The case is the man, Hastings. All along I have been trying to get to know the murderer, and now I realize that I do not know him at all. I am at sea. Why commit these murders? Why did he choose those particular people? Was Betty Barnard the only person in Bexhill whose name began with a B? Betty Barnard. I had an idea there. It ought to be true. It must be true. But if so—" He was silent for a moment. "Mon cher Hastings," he said affectionately, his hand on my shoulder, "my good genius." I was quite confused by this sudden mark of esteem. "It is true," Poirot went on. "While I was asking myself certain questions, I remembered a remark of yours, a remark absolutely shimmering in its clear vision. Did I not say to you once that you had a genius for stating the obvious? It is the obvious that I have neglected." "What is this brilliant remark of mine?" I asked. "It makes everything clear as crystal," said Poirot. "The reason for Mrs. Asher, the reason for Sir Carmichael Clarke, the reason for the Doncaster murder, and finally, and supremely important, the reason for Hercule Poirot." "Could you kindly explain?" "Not at the moment. I require a little more information, and when I have got the answer to a certain question, I will go and see A.B.C. "And then?" I asked. "Then we will talk. There is nothing so dangerous for anyone who has something to hide as conversation, Hastings. What do you expect Cust to tell you?" Hercule Poirot smiled. "A lie," he said, "and by it I shall know the truth." During the next few days, Poirot was very busy. Towards the end of the week, he announced his intention of paying a visit to Bexhill, and suggested that I should accompany him. The members of our Special Legion were also invited. They were as intrigued by Poirot as I was. Nevertheless, by the end of the day, I had at any rate an idea as to the direction in which Poirot's thoughts were tending. He first visited Mr. and Mrs. Barnard, and got an exact account from her as to the hour at which Mr. Cust called. He then went to the hotel at which Cust had put up, and got a minute description of that gentleman's departure. Next, he went to the beach where Betty Barnard's body had been discovered. I could see little point in this, since the tide covered the spot twice a day. However, I had learned by this time that Poirot's actions are usually dictated by an idea, however meaningless they may seem. He then walked from the beach to the nearest point at which a car could have been parked. From there, he went to the place where the Eastbourne buses waited before leaving Bexhill. Finally, he took us all to the Ginger Cat Cafe, where we had a somewhat stale tea, served by the plump waitress, Millie Higley. He complimented her in flowing Gallic style on the shape of her ankles, at which she giggled a good deal, and he ogled her in such a way that I was startled and almost shocked. "Voila," said Poirot. "I have finished in Bexhill. Presently I go to Eastbourne. Unnecessary for you all to accompany me. In the meantime, come back to the hotel." As we were sipping our cocktails, Franklin Clark said, "I suppose you're out to break that alibi. But you haven't got a new fact of any kind." Poirot's face grew serious. "My friend Hastings told me once that he had as a young man played a game called The Truth. Everyone in turn was asked a question, and everyone had to swear that they would indeed speak nothing but the truth." He paused. "Well," said Megan, "eh bien, I want to play that game. Do you all swear to speak the truth?" He was so solemn that they all swore as he demanded. "Bon, let us begin," said Poirot briskly. "This time ladies first would not be the politeness." He turned to Franklin Clark. "What, mon cher Monsieur Clark, did you think of the hats the ladies wore at Ascot this year?" Franklin Clark stared at him. "Is this a joke?" "Certainly not." Franklin Clark began to grin. "Well, Monsieur Poirot, I didn't actually go to Ascot, but from what I could see of them, driving down in cars, the women's hats for Ascot were an even bigger joke than the hats they wear ordinarily." Poirot smiled, and turned to Donald Fraser. "When did you take your holiday this year, monsieur?" It was Fraser's turn to stare. "Oh, for the first 2 weeks of August." His face quivered suddenly. Poirot turned to Thora Grey. His voice tightened. "Mademoiselle, in the event of Lady Clark's death, would you have married Sir Carmichael if he had asked you?" The girl sprang up. "How dare you ask me such a question? It's insulting." "Perhaps, but you have sworn to speak the truth. Eh bien, yes or no?" She hesitated. "The answer, of course, is no." Poirot made no comment. He turned to Megan Barnard. The girl's face was very pale. Poirot's voice came out like the crack of a whiplash. "Mademoiselle, do you want me to find out the truth or not?" Megan, I knew, had a fanatical passion for the truth. Her answer came clearly, and it stupefied me. "No." We all jumped. Poirot leaned forward, studying her face. Then he turned calmly towards Mary Drower. "Tell me, mon enfant, have you a young man?" Mary looked startled and blushed. "Oh, Mr. Poirot, I'm not sure." He smiled. "Alors, c'est bien, mon enfant." He looked around for me. "Come, Hastings, let us go." As we sat in the car on the journey back to London, he suddenly broke the silence. "What is it they say, Hastings? And catch a fox, and put him in a box, and never let him go?" His face had gone suddenly grave and stern. "To be shut away in a box forever. No, it is not good that. Tomorrow I am going to visit the man Cust." I was not present at the interview that took place between Poirot and that strange man, Alexander Bonaparte Cust. Poirot has given me, however, such a detailed account of what passed between them that I have set it down with as much confidence on paper as though I had actually been present. Mr. Cust seemed to have shrunk. His stoop was more pronounced. His fingers plucked vaguely at his coat. For some time, I gather, Poirot did not speak. He sat and looked at the man opposite him. The atmosphere became restful, soothing, full of infinite leisure. At last Poirot said gently, "Do you know who I am?" The other shook his head. "I am Hercule Poirot." Mr. Cust raised his head a little. "Oh, yes," he said. "Oh, yes," he repeated a minute later, and this time his tone held an awakened interest. Hercule Poirot met his gaze. "Yes," he said, "I am the man to whom you wrote the letters." At once the contact was broken. Mr. Cust spoke irritably and fretfully. "Those letters weren't written by me. I've said so again and again." "I know," said Poirot. "But if you did not write them, who did?" "It's a gigantic conspiracy," said Mr. Cust. "Everyone's hand has been against me, always." "Even when you were a child?" Mr. Cust seemed to consider. No, not exactly. My mother was very fond of me, but she was terribly ambitious, always urging me to assert myself, saying anyone could be master of his fate. She said I could do anything." He was silent for a moment. "She was quite wrong, of course. I realized quite soon that I wasn't the sort of person to get on in life. I did very badly at school." He shook his head. "Just as well poor mother died. Even when I was at commercial college I was stupid. And yet I didn't feel stupid. It was just that everyone else thought me stupid." "And later, in the war?" prompted Poirot. Mr. Cust's face lightened up suddenly. "You know," he said, "I enjoyed the war. I felt, for the first time, a man like anybody else." His smile faded. "And then I got that wound on the head. Very slight, but they found out I had fits, lapses, you know, and they discharged me." "And afterwards?" asked Poirot. "I got a place as a clerk. I was always being passed over for promotion. It grew very difficult. To tell you the truth, I'd got hardly enough to keep body and soul together when I got the offer of this stocking job." Poirot said gently, "But you are aware, are you not, that the firm whom you say employed you deny the fact?" Mr. Cust got excited. "That's because they're in the conspiracy," he went on. "I've got written evidence. I've got their letters to me, giving me instructions as to what places to go and a list of people to call on." "Not written evidence exactly, typewritten evidence." "It's the same thing." "Don't you know, Mr. Cust, that a typewriter can be identified? All those letters were typed by one particular machine, and that machine was the one found in your room, so it looks as though you typed them yourself." "No, it's all part of the conspiracy against me," Mr. Cust repeated obstinately. "And the ABCs that were found in the cupboard?" asked Poirot. "I thought they were all stockings." "Why did you tick off the name of Mrs. Asher in that first list of people in Andover?" "Well, because one must begin somewhere." "Yes, one must begin somewhere." Mr. Cust was trembling. "I don't mean that. I didn't do it. I'm perfectly innocent. Look at that second crime, that Bexhill one. I was playing dominoes at Eastbourne that evening." "You play dominoes very well, I believe." Mr. Cust was flurried a little by this. I believe I do." "It is a very absorbing game, is it not, with a lot of skill in it?" Mr. Cust chuckled. "There's a lot of play in it. I remember one man. I've never forgotten him because of something he told me. We just got talking over a cup of coffee, and then we started to play dominoes. Well, after 20 minutes I felt I'd known that man all my life." "What was it he told you?" asked Poirot. Mr. Cust's face clouded over. He talked of your fate being written in your hand, and then he looked at mine and said I was going to be one of the most celebrated men in England before I died. But he said... Mr. Cust broke down, faltered. "Yes?" Poirot's gaze held a quiet magnetism. Mr. Cust looked at him like a fascinated rabbit. He said that it looked as though I might die a violent death, and he laughed and said, 'Almost looks as though you might die on the scaffold.'" He was silent suddenly. His eyes left Poirot's face. "My head, I suffer very badly with my head, and then there are times when I don't know, when I don't know." He broke down. Poirot spoke very quietly, but with great assurance. "But you do know, don't you," he said, "that you committed the murders?" Mr. Cust looked up. His glance was quite simple and direct. He looked strangely at peace. "Yes," he said, "I know. But I am right, am I not? You don't know why you did them?" Mr. Cust shook his head. "No," he said, "I don't." We were sitting in a state of tense attention to listen to Poirot's final explanation of the case. "All along," he said, "I have been worried over the why of this case. Hastings said to me the other day that the case was ended. I replied to him that the case was the man. The mystery was not the mystery of the murders, but the mystery of A.B.C. Why did he find it necessary to commit these murders? Why did he select me as his adversary? It is no answer to say that the man was mentally unhinged. A madman is as logical and reasoned in his actions as a sane man, given his peculiarly biased point of view. What was necessary was to imagine a mind so constituted that it was logical and reasonable to commit 4 or more murders, and to announce them beforehand by letters written to Hercule Poirot. My friend Hastings will tell you that from the moment I received the first letter, I was upset and disturbed. It seemed to me at once that there was something very wrong about the letter. "Well, you were quite right," said Franklin Clark. "Yes, but at the very start I made a grave error. I permitted my feeling, my very strong feeling about the letter, to remain a mere impression. I treated it as though it had been an intuition. But what is often called an intuition is really an impression based on logical deduction or experience, on a host of small signs and details. It is not a guess. It is an impression based on experience." Eh bien, I admit that I did not regard that first letter in the way I should. It just made me extremely uneasy. I was convinced that a murder would take place in Andover as stated. As you know, a murder did take place. There was no means at that point of knowing who the person was who had done the deed. The only course open to me was to try to understand just what kind of person had done it. I had certain indications. The letter, the manner of the crime, the person murdered. What I had to discover was the motive of the crime, the motive of the letter. "Publicity?" suggested Clark. "Oh, surely an inferiority complex covers that," added Thora Grey. "But why write to me? Why Hercule Poirot? Was it for some personal motive? There was discernible in the letter a slight anti-foreign bias, but not enough to explain the matter. Then the second letter arrived, and was followed by the murder at Bexhill. It became clear that the murders were to proceed on an alphabetical plan. But why did A.B.C. need to commit these murders?" Megan Barnard stirred in her chair. "Isn't there such a thing as a bloodlust?" she said. Poirot turned to her. "You are quite right, mademoiselle. But that did not quite fit the facts of the case. The great idea of a homicidal maniac is to hide his tracks, not to advertise them. When we consider the 4 victims selected, we realize that if he had chosen, the murderer could have done away with them without incurring any suspicion. Why, then, did the murderer feel it necessary to call attention to himself?" Although I could not answer the main question, there were certain things I did feel I was learning about the murderer. "Such as?" asked Donald Fraser. "To begin with, that he had a tabular mind. His crimes were listed by alphabetical progression. On the other hand, he had no particular taste in victims. They all differed widely from each other. There was something haphazard about the procedure of A.B.C. that seemed to me to be at war with the alphabetical selection. One slight inference I permitted myself to make. The choice of the A.B.C. suggested to me what I may call a railway-minded man. This is more common in men than in women. It might be the sign, too, of an in some ways undeveloped mind. The death of Betty Barnard gave me certain other indications. Forgive me, Mr. Fraser. To begin with, she was strangled by her own belt. Therefore, she must almost certainly have been killed by someone with whom she was on friendly terms. Betty Barnard was a flirt. Therefore A.B.C., to persuade her to come out with him, must have had a certain amount of attraction, of le sex appeal. I visualized the scene on the beach thus. The man admires her belt. She takes it off. He passes it playfully around her neck and says, "Perhaps I shall strangle you." She giggles. He pulls. Donald Fraser sprang up, livid. "Monsieur Poirot, for God's sake!" It is over. I say no more. We pass to the murder of Sir Carmichael Clarke. The same alphabetical complex, but one fact worries me. To be consistent, the murderer should have chosen his towns in some definite sequence. If Andover is the 155th name under A, then the B crime should also be the 155th, or it should be the 156th, and C the 157th. Here again the towns seem to be chosen in rather too haphazard a fashion. "Well, isn't that because you're rather biased, Poirot?" I suggested. "You yourself are normally methodical. It's almost a disease with you." "No, it is not a disease, but I admit I may be overstressing the point. Passons. We were unlucky over the Churston crime, since the letter announcing it went astray, hence no preparations could be made. But by the time the D crime was announced, a very formidable system of defense had been evolved. Moreover, it was at this point that the clue of the stockings came into my head. It was perfectly clear that the presence of the stocking seller on and near the scene of each crime could not be a coincidence. Hence, he must be the murderer. But his description, as given by Miss Grey, did not quite correspond with my own picture of the man who murdered Betty Barnard. A fourth murder was committed, of a man named George Earlsfield. It was supposed in mistake for a man named Downs. And now, at last, comes the turn of the tide. Events play against A.B.C. instead of into his hands. He is marked down, hunted, and at last arrested. The case, as Hastings said, is ended. The man is in prison. There will be no more murders. Exit. Fini. R.I.P. But not for me. I know neither the why nor the wherefore. And there is one small, vexing fact. The man Cust has an alibi for the night of the Bexhill murder. "Well, that's been worrying me all along," said Franklin Clarke. "Yes, it worried me. For the alibi, it has the air of being genuine. But now we come to two very interesting speculations. Supposing, my friends, that while Cust committed 3 of the crimes, the A, C, and D crimes, he did not commit the B crime." "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, it isn't—" began Megan Barnard. Poirot silenced her with a look. "Be quiet, mademoiselle. Supposing that A.B.C. did not commit the second crime, supposing someone forestalled him, what would he do? Commit a second murder, or lie low and accept the first as a kind of macabre present?" "Monsieur Poirot," said Megan, "all the crimes must have been committed by the same person." Poirot took no notice of her, and went steadily on. "Such a hypothesis had the merit of explaining one fact, the discrepancy between the personality of Alexander Bonaparte Cust, who could never have picked up a girl, and the personality of Betty Barnard's murderer. And it has been known before now that would-be murderers have taken advantage of crimes committed by other people. But then I came up against a definite difficulty. The Andover murder created little interest. The open railway guide was not even mentioned in the press. It therefore followed that whoever killed Betty Barnard must have had access to facts known only to certain persons, myself, the police, and certain relations and neighbours of Mrs. Asher. That line seemed to lead up against a blank wall. The faces that looked at him were blank too, and puzzled. Donald Fraser said thoughtfully, "Well, the police, after all, are human beings, and they're good-looking men." He looked inquiringly at Poirot. Poirot shook his head gently. "No, it is simpler than that. Supposing Cust was not responsible for killing Betty Barnard, supposing that someone else killed her, and could have been responsible for the other murders too." "That doesn't make sense," cried Clarke. doesn't it? I did then what I ought to have done at first. I examined the letters I had received again from a totally different point of view. What was wrong with them was the fact that they were written by a sane man. What? I cried. But yes, just that precisely. They were wrong because they were a fake. They pretended to be the letters of a madman, a homicidal maniac, but in reality they were nothing of the kind. Well, it doesn't make sense, repeated Franklin Clark. Mais si. One must reason, reflect. And then I saw the light. It was to focus attention on several murders, on a group of murders. Is it not your great Shakespeare who has said, "You cannot see the trees for the wood"? I did not correct Poirot's literary reminiscences. I was trying to see his point. A glimmer came to me. He went on, "When do you notice an individual murdered least? When it is one of a series of related murders." I had to deal with an intensely clever, resourceful murderer, reckless, daring, and a thorough gambler, not Mr. Cust. He could never have committed these murders, no. I had to deal with a man with a boyish temperament, witness the schoolboy letters, the railway guide, an attractive man to women, and a man with ruthless disregard for human life, a man who was necessarily a prominent person in one of the crimes. If the motive and opportunity are fairly obvious, what is a would-be murderer to do? Fake an alibi? Our murderer thought of a more fantastic defense. Create a homicidal murderer. I had now only to review the various crimes and find the possible guilty person. The Andover crime. I could not imagine Franz Asher inventing and carrying out such an elaborate scheme, nor carrying out a premeditated murder. The Bexhill crime? Donald Fraser was a possibility, but his motive could only be jealousy, and jealousy does not tend to premeditation. Also, I learned that he had his holidays early in August, which rendered it unlikely he had anything to do with the Churston crime. Poirot paused. So, we come to the Churston crime, and at once we are on infinitely more promising ground. Sir Carmichael Clark was an immensely wealthy man. Who inherits? His wife, who is dying, has a life interest in it, and then it goes to his brother Franklin. Poirot turned slowly round till his eyes met those of Franklin Clark. I was quite sure then. A.B.C. and Franklin Clark were one and the same. The daring adventurer, the roving life, the partiality for England that had showed itself, very faintly, in the jeer at foreigners, the attractive, free and easy manner, nothing easier for him than to pick up a girl in a cafe. The methodical tabular mind. He made a list here one day, ticked off over the headings A.B.C., and finally the boyish mind, mentioned by Lady Clark, and even shown by his taste for fiction. There is a book in the library called The Railway Children, by E. Nesbit. I had no further doubts in my own mind. A.B.C., the man who wrote the letters and committed the crimes, was Franklin Clark. Clark suddenly burst out laughing. "Very ingenious. And what about our friend Cust, caught red-handed? Blood on his coat, the knife he hid in his lodgings. He may deny he committed the crimes." Poirot interrupted. "You are quite wrong. He admits the fact." "What?" Clark looked really startled. "Oh, yes," said Poirot gently. "Mr. Cust believed himself guilty." "And even that didn't satisfy Monsieur Poirot," said Clark. "No. Because as soon as I saw him, I also knew that he could not be guilty. He has neither the nerve nor the daring, nor, may I add, the brains. All along, I have been aware of the dual personality of the murderer. Now I see it. Two people were involved. The real murderer, cunning, resourceful and daring, and the pseudo-murderer, stupid, vacillating and suggestible. It was not enough for you, Mr. Clark, to devise this plan of a series to distract attention from a single crime. You had also to have a stalking horse. I think the idea first originated in your mind as the result of a chance encounter in a city coffee den with this odd personality with his bombastic Christian names. You were at that time turning over in your mind various plans for the murder of your brother." "Really? And why?" Because you were seriously alarmed for the future. I do not know if you realize it, Mr. Clark, but you played into my hands when you showed me a letter written to you by your brother. In it, he displayed very clearly his absorption in Miss Grey. His regard may have been a paternal one. Nevertheless, there was a very real danger that on the death of your sister-in-law he might end in marrying her. You are, I fancy, an excellent, if somewhat cynical, judge of character. You judged, whether correctly or not, that Miss Grey would jump at the chance of becoming Lady Clark. Your brother was an extremely healthy and vigorous man. There might be children, and your chance of inheriting your brother's wealth would vanish. You have been, I fancy, in essence, a disappointed man all your life. You have been the rolling stone, and you have gathered very little moss. You were bitterly jealous of your brother's wealth. I repeat, then, that turning over various schemes in your mind, your meeting with Mr. Cust gave you an idea, his bombastic Christian names, his account of his epileptic seizures and of his headaches, his whole shrinking and insignificant personality, struck you as fitting him for the tool you wanted. The whole alphabetical plan sprang into your mind, Cust's initials, the fact that your brother's name began with a C and that he lived in Churston, were the nucleus of the scheme. Your arrangements were excellent. In Cust's name, you wrote for a large consignment of hosiery to be sent to him. You yourself sent a number of A.B.Cs, looking like a similar parcel. You wrote to him a typed letter, purporting to be from the same firm, offering him a good salary and commission. Your plans were so well laid beforehand that you typed all the letters that were sent subsequently, and then presented him with the machine on which they had been typed. You had now to hit on 2 victims, whose names began with A and B respectively, and who lived at places also beginning with those same letters. You hit on Andover, and your preliminary reconnaissance there led you to select Mrs. Asher's shop. Her name was clearly written over the door, and you found that she was usually alone in the shop. For the letter B, you had to vary your tactics. I imagine that you frequented a few cafes and tea-shops, laughing and joking with the girls there, finding out whose name began with the right letter. In Betty Barnard, you found just the type of girl you were looking for. You took her out once or twice, explaining to her that you are a married man and that outings must therefore take place in a somewhat hole-in-a-corner manner. Then, your preliminary plans completed, you set to work. You sent the Andover list to Cust, directing him to go there on a certain date, and you sent off the first A.B.C. letter to me. On the appointed day you went to Andover and killed Mrs. Asher. For the second murder, you took the precaution of committing it, in reality, the day before. I am fairly certain that Betty Barnard was killed well before midnight on the 24th of July. We now come to murder number 3, the important, in fact, the real murder from your point of view. And here, full praise is due to Hastings, who made a simple and obvious remark to which no attention was paid. You addressed your envelope very cleverly. Whitehaven, White Horse. Quite a natural slip. Only Hastings was sufficiently perspicacious to go straight for the obvious. He suggested that the third letter went astray intentionally, and he was right. And in that one simple fact lies the answer to the question that puzzled me so all along. Why were the letters addressed to Hercule Poirot, a private detective, and not to the police? Erroneously, I imagined some personal reason. Not at all. The letters were sent to me because the essence of your plan was that one of them should be wrongly addressed and go astray. But you cannot arrange for a letter addressed to the Criminal Investigation Department at Scotland Yard to go astray. It is necessary to have a private address. Also, in your rather insular mind, you enjoyed scoring off a foreigner. The police were to be set on the trail only when the murder was safely over. Your brother's night walk provided you with the opportunity, and so successfully had the A.B.C. terror taken hold on the public mind that the possibility of your guilt never occurred to anyone. After the death of your brother, your object was accomplished. On the other hand, If the murders stopped without reason, a suspicion of the truth might come to someone. Your stalking horse, Mr. Cust, had so successfully lived up to his role of the invisible because insignificant man that so far no one had noticed that the same person had been seen in the vicinity of 3 murders. You decided that one more murder must take place, but this time the trail must be well blazed. You selected Doncaster. Your plan was very simple. You yourself would be on the scene in the nature of things. Everything fell out well. Mr. Cust went to a cinema. You sat a few seats away from him. When he got up, you did the same. You pretended to stumble, leaned over, and stabbed a dozing man in the row in front, slid the A.B.C. onto his knees, and managed to collide heavily with Mr. Cust in the darkened doorway, wiping the knife on his sleeve and slipping it into his pocket. You were not in the least at pains to choose a victim whose name began with D. There was sure to be someone whose name began with D not far off in the audience. It would be assumed he had been the intended victim. And now, my friends, let us consider the matter from the point of view of the false A.B.C., Mr. Cust. The Andover crime means nothing to him. He is shocked and surprised by the Bexhill crime. Why, he himself was there at the time. Then comes the Churston crime, and the headlines in the newspapers. 3 crimes, and he has been at the scene of each of them. Persons suffering from epilepsy often have blanks when they cannot remember what they have done. Then he receives orders to go to Doncaster, because it is his duty. In the afternoon he goes to a cinema. Possibly he dozes off. Imagine his feelings when, on his return to his inn, he discovers that there is blood on his coat sleeve, and a blood-stained knife in his pocket. All his vague forebodings leap into certainty. He himself is the killer. He is quite sure of the truth. His conduct after that is the conduct of a hunted animal. He hides the knife behind the hall stand in his lodgings in London. Then he is warned that the police are coming. It is the end. The hunted animal does his last run. I don't know why he went back to Andover. A morbid desire, I think, to look at the place where the crime was committed, though he can remember nothing about it. He has no money left. He is worn out. His feet lead him of his own accord to the police station. Mr. Cust fully believes that he did the murders, but he holds with desperation to that alibi for the second murder. When I saw him, I knew at once he was not the murderer, and that my name meant nothing to him. And after he confessed his guilt to me, I knew more strongly than ever that my own theory was right. "Your theory is absurd," said Franklin Clark. Poirot shook his head. "No, Mr. Clark. You were safe enough so long as no one suspected you. Once you were suspected, proofs were easy to obtain." "Proofs?" said Clark. "Yes. I found the stick you used in the Andover and Churston murders in a cupboard at Coomside. Your photograph was picked out from half a dozen others by 2 people who saw you leaving the cinema when you were supposed to be on the racecourse. You were identified at Bexhill by Millie Higley, and a girl from the Scarlet Runner Roadhouse where you took Betty Barnard to dine on the fatal evening. And finally, you left a fingerprint on Cust's typewriter. The typewriter that, if you are innocent, you could never have handled. Rouge, impair manque. You win, Monsieur Poirot. But it was worth trying. With an incredibly rapid motion, he whipped out a small automatic from his pocket and held it to his head, but no report came. The hammer clicked harmlessly. Clark stared at it in astonishment and uttered an oath. "No, Mr. Clark," said Poirot. "You may have noticed I had a new manservant today. A friend of mine, an expert pickpocket. He removed your pistol from your pocket, unloaded it, and returned it. No easy death for you, Mr. Clark." You! Clark was purple with rage. Words failed him. His fist clenched menacingly. 2 detectives from Scotland Yard emerged from the next room. One of them was Crome. He uttered the time-honoured formula. "I warn you that anything you say may be used in evidence." The door closed behind Clark as he was led away. Megan Barnard sighed deeply. "Yes, the nightmare is over," said Poirot. He turned to Fraser. "All along, Mademoiselle Megan was haunted by a fear that it was you who had committed the second crime." "I thought so myself at one time," said Donald Fraser quietly. "Because of your dream. It has a very natural explanation. Mademoiselle Megan replaces her sister in your heart. But, so soon after the death, you strive to stifle the thought, to kill it." Fraser's eyes went towards Megan. "Do not be afraid to forget," said Poirot gently. "In Mademoiselle Megan you have 1 in 100. Un cœur magnifique." Donald Fraser's eyes lit up. "I believe you're right." We all crowded round Poirot. "Those questions, Poirot, was there any point in them? Some of them were simplement a ruse, but I learnt one thing, that Franklin Clark was in London when the first letter was posted. And I also wanted to see his face when I asked my question of Mademoiselle Thora." "You hardly spared my feelings," said Thora Grey. "I do not fancy you returned me a truthful answer, mademoiselle," said Poirot dryly. "And now your second expectation is disappointed. Franklin Clark will not inherit his brother's money." She flung up her head. "Is there any need for me to stay and be insulted?" "None whatever, mademoiselle," said Poirot, and held the door open politely for her. "That fingerprint clinched things, Poirot," I said thoughtfully. "I put that in to please you, my friend," he said. "But Poirot," I cried, "wasn't it true?" "Not in the least, mon ami," said Hercule Poirot. I must mention a visit we had from Mr. Alexander Bonaparte Cust a few days later. After wringing Poirot's hand and endeavouring incoherently to thank him, Mr. Cust said, "Do you know, a newspaper has actually offered me £100. £100! For a brief account of my life and history." "I should not accept 100, said Poirot. "Be firm. Say 500 is your price, and do not confine yourself to one newspaper." "Do you really think—" "You must realize," said Poirot, smiling, "that you are practically the most famous man in England today." Mr. Cust drew himself up. "The money will be most agreeable. I shall have a little holiday. And I want to give a nice wedding present to Lily Marbury. A dear girl. Really a dear girl, Monsieur Poirot." He shook Poirot warmly by the hand. "You're a very great man, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot, as usual, did not disdain the compliment. He did not even succeed in looking modest. My old friend smiled across at me. "So, Hastings, we went hunting once more, did we not? Vive le sport!"